The locomotive's brakes screamed against frozen rails as the 1147 from Philadelphia shuddered to a halt at Blackstone Station. Evelyn Mercer pressed her gloved hand against the frost-clouded window, watching coal smoke twist through yellow lamplight and disappear into the January dark. Her ribs ached where Victor's boot had caught her 3 days ago. Her left eye had finally stopped swelling, though the bruise beneath her carefully applied powder still throbbed with each heartbeat. She'd made it. 2,000 miles from the brick mansion on Rittenhouse Square. 2,000 miles from her cousin's fists and his whispered threats about family duty and her father's money and what happened to ungrateful women who forgot their place. The conductor's voice cut through her thoughts. Blackstone Station. All passengers for Blackstone. Evelyn stood, her legs unsteady. Not from the train's motion, from the weight of what she'd done. The leather suitcase beneath her seat held everything she owned now. 3 dresses, her mother's silver brush, the railway correspondence that had changed everything, folded carefully in an envelope addressed to Mr. Colt Ryder, Freight Operations, Blackstone Station, Wyoming Territory. She'd answered his listing 6 weeks ago. A practical arrangement, he'd written. A partnership built on honesty and mutual respect. No flowery promises, no declarations of love, just a straightforward offer, a home in exchange for companionship, help managing his freight business, and a future neither of them would face alone. She hadn't told him about Victor, hadn't mentioned the bruises or the locked bedroom doors or the night she'd climbed down the trellis with her suitcase and ran through rain-slicked streets to the station, her cousin's drunken shouting echoing behind her. Some truths were too dangerous to put in letters. The other passengers filed past, a drummer with sample cases, a young family heading further west, an older woman who'd spent the journey knitting and asking too many questions. Evelyn waited until the car emptied before reaching for her suitcase. Her right shoulder protested. Victor had wrenched it badly when he dragged her back from the parlor door 2 weeks before Christmas. She forced herself to move. Forced herself down the aisle, through the coach car that still smelled of coal smoke and unwashed bodies, down the steps onto a platform slick with ice and old snow. The cold hit her like a fist. Blackstone Station sprawled before her, bigger than she'd expected for a frontier town. Gas lamps flickered along covered platforms where men in heavy coats shouted orders and rolled freight barrels across wooden planks. A massive water tower loomed against the stars. Beyond the station building, she could make out dark shapes that might be warehouses or livestock pens, or the freight yards Colt had mentioned in his letters. A rail town. A place where trains came and went and people asked fewer questions. A place where maybe, just maybe, Victor wouldn't find her. Miss Mercer? The voice came from her left, low, careful, with the kind of Western drawl she'd only heard from ranch hands who sometimes visited her father's bank. She turned. The man stood just beyond the lamp's reach, broad-shouldered beneath a dark wool coat, hat pulled low against the wind. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her suitcase or offer his hand, just stood there, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Mr. Ryder? Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He stepped forward into the light and she got her first real look at the man she'd agreed to marry. Somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed. Taller than Victor by half a head. Work-roughened hands, clean-shaven face, eyes the color of river stones. He carried himself like men did out here. Steady, self-contained, no wasted motion. Nothing like the polished Eastern gentleman who'd courted her before her father died. Nothing like Victor, with his expensive suits and cologne that couldn't quite mask the whiskey. Yes, ma'am. Colt Ryder touched the brim of his hat. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult. She'd spent 3 days on hard wooden seats, jumping at every loud voice, certain that Victor had somehow followed her aboard. She'd barely slept, barely eaten. Every station stop had sent panic crawling up her throat. It was fine, she lied. His eyes lingered on her face for just a moment, on the carefully powdered bruise she thought she'd hidden well enough. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or concern. But he didn't mention it. I've got the wagon just outside. He gestured toward the station building. It's not far to where you'll be staying. Staying? Evelyn's hand tightened on her suitcase. I thought your letters said, I've arranged a room for you with Mrs. Quinn. His voice stayed level, but she caught something underneath it. Patience, maybe. or the kind of careful courtesy men used around skittish horses. She's a widow, runs a boarding house near the station. I figured you'd want some time to settle in before we made things official. Get to know the town. Make sure this arrangement suits you. The knot in Evelyn's chest loosened just slightly. That's very considerate. It's decent. He finally reached for her suitcase. May I? She hesitated, then nodded. He took the bag, his calloused fingers brushing her gloved hand for just a second. She didn't flinch, barely, but he noticed. She could tell by the way his jaw tightened. They walked through the station in silence. The main building was larger inside than she'd expected. High ceilings, a ticket office with brass fixtures, a waiting area where a few travelers dozed on wooden benches. A telegraph office occupied one corner, its operator bent over his instrument, tapping out messages to distant cities. Cities where Victor might already be sending telegrams, asking if anyone had seen his runaway cousin. You all right, ma'am? Evelyn realized she'd stopped walking. Colt stood a few paces ahead, watching her with those careful eyes. Just tired, she said. He didn't challenge the lie, just nodded and led her outside, where a wagon waited with two horses stamping their feet in the cold. He set her suitcase in the back with the same deliberate gentleness, then offered his hand to help her up. She took it. His grip was solid, warm through her glove. Nothing possessive about it, nothing that made her skin crawl the way Victor's touches did. He climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. Mrs. Quinn's expecting you. I sent word yesterday. She's a good woman, lost her husband 5 years back, railroad accident. She'll answer any questions you have about Blackstone. The wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching over frozen dirt. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter. And you? What about me? Where will you be staying? The freight yard. I've got an office there with a back room. It's not much, but it keeps me close to the work. He guided the horses around a corner, past darkened storefronts and a saloon where piano music leaked through the walls. I figure we can get to know each other proper-like before we stand before the minister. Have supper a few times. Talk about how the partnership might work. Make sure we're both agreeable to the arrangement. Partnership. He kept using that word. Not marriage in the traditional sense. Not ownership. That sounds reasonable, Evelyn said quietly. They rode through streets she couldn't see well enough to remember. Blackstone was bigger than she'd imagined. Not just a rail stop, but a real town with businesses and homes and churches. Lamplight flickered in windows. Somewhere a dog barked. The mountains rose up in the distance, black shapes against a blacker sky. Victor would hate it here. Too rough. Too far from the theaters and clubs and society parties, where he could parade his wealth and pretend to be something better than a violent drunk who'd spent his dead uncle's fortune keeping his cousin locked in a gilded cage. Good. Let him hate it. We're here. The boarding house was a 2-story frame building with a porch wrapped around the front. Light glowed in several windows. The door opened before Colt even set the brake, and a woman stepped out, 50-ish, gray hair pinned back, wearing a practical dress and a shawl against the cold. You must be Miss Mercer. Her voice carried the same Western warmth as Colt's. I'm Mara Quinn. Welcome to Blackstone. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, accepting Mara's offered hand. The older woman's grip was firm, her eyes sharp in the lamplight. Those eyes swept over Evelyn's face, lingering on the bruise she thought she'd hidden so well. Thank you for taking me in on such short notice, Evelyn managed. No trouble at all. Mara's expression softened. Colt, bring her bag inside. I've got the kettle on. The interior of the boarding house smelled like bread and wood smoke. The parlor was simple but comfortable. Worn furniture, a pot-bellied stove radiating heat, lace curtains on the windows. A narrow staircase led to the second floor. Mara shooed them toward the kitchen. Sit down, both of you. You look half frozen. The kitchen was warm, the stove banked for the night, but still giving off heat. Mara poured tea from a chipped pot into mismatched cups and set them on a scarred wooden table. Evelyn wrapped her cold hands around her cup, grateful for the warmth. I've put you in the back room upstairs, Mara said, settling into a chair across from Evelyn. It's quiet. Faces the alley, not the street, so you won't be bothered by wagon noise in the morning. She glanced at Colt. Did you explain the arrangement? Yes, ma'am. Colt's hands dwarfed his teacup. Miss Mercer will stay here until the wedding. I'll cover the boarding costs, of course. I don't want charity, Evelyn said quickly. If there's work I can do to offset... There might be. Mara studied her with those sharp eyes. Can you read? Yes, and I keep a good ledger. My father was a banker. He taught me accounting. Something passed between Mara and Colt, a look Evelyn couldn't quite interpret. The freight office could use someone with a head for numbers, Colt said slowly. If you're willing, Miss Mercer. I'm better with cargo than ledgers. Been making a mess of the books for the better part of a year. I'd be glad to help. The words came easier than she expected. A job, purpose, something to fill the hours besides waiting and watching the streets for Victor's face. They talked for another half hour, small things, mostly. The weather, the town, the schedule of trains coming and going. Evelyn learned that Blackstone sat at a junction point where lines split toward California and Oregon. Freight business was good. The town was growing. Mara's boarding house stayed full during the busy season. Normal conversation. The kind of talk she'd almost forgotten existed outside of Victor's interrogations about where she'd been and who she'd spoken to and why she'd dared leave the house without his permission. Finally, Colt stood. I should let you get some rest, Miss Mercer. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon, if that's all right. We can walk over to the freight office. I'll show you what I've been doing wrong with the books. That would be fine. He nodded to Mara, touched his hat brim to Evelyn, and let himself out. A moment later, they heard the wagon pulling away. Mara began gathering the cups. He's a good man. You've known him long? 5 years, since he came to Blackstone and bought the freight operation from the previous owner. Mara paused, hands still on the cups. He doesn't talk much about before, but I know he lost someone. A sister, I think. It changed him, made him careful about who he trusts and how he treats people. Evelyn's throat tightened. I see. He won't hurt you. Mara set the cups in the wash basin and turned to face Evelyn directly. Whatever happened back east, whoever put those bruises on you, Colt Ryder isn't that kind of man. The careful facade Evelyn had been maintaining cracked just slightly. How did you... I've seen bruises before, dear. I know what they look like under powder. Mara's voice was gentle but firm. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share, but you should know you're safe here. In this house, in this town, with Colt. Whatever you're running from, you've got people who'll stand with you now. Evelyn couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod as tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. Mara crossed to her and wrapped strong arms around her shoulders. Not demanding, not possessive, just steady and warm and present. It's all right, Mara murmured. You cry if you need to. Nobody here is going to judge you for it. So Evelyn did. She cried for her father and her stolen inheritance, for the girl she'd been before Victor turned their home into a prison, for every locked door and whispered threat and bruise hidden beneath long sleeves. And when the tears finally stopped, Mara helped her upstairs to a small clean room with a bed covered in a wedding ring quilt and windows that overlooked an alley instead of Philadelphia's most prestigious square. Evelyn lay awake long into the night, listening to unfamiliar sounds. Distant train whistles, wind rattling the shutters. Footsteps on the street below. Different sounds than the ones she'd grown accustomed to. Victor's heavy tread outside her locked door, the clink of bottles, his voice calling her name in that tone that meant she'd done something wrong again. But here, those sounds were just part of a frontier town settling in for the night. Here, the door had a lock that worked from the inside. Here, 2,000 miles stretched between her and the man who'd turned family duty into a nightmare. She pulled the quilt up to her chin and let her eyes close. Tomorrow she'd meet Colt properly, see his freight office, start to understand what her life might become in this strange new place. Tomorrow she'd start building whatever came next. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she'd sleep without fear that Victor would come through the door. The morning arrived too bright and too cold. Evelyn woke to the sound of wagons rattling past and men shouting orders somewhere down the street. She dressed carefully in her plainest dress, dark blue wool, high collar, long sleeves to cover the yellowing bruises on her forearms. The mirror above the washstand showed a pale woman with shadows under her eyes and hair that had come loose from its pins during the night. She fixed it as best she could, then made her way downstairs. The kitchen smelled like coffee and frying bacon. Mara stood at the stove, tending a skillet while 2 men in work clothes sat at the table, eating in silence. "Good morning," Mara said cheerfully. "I hope you slept well." Well enough, thank you. The men glanced up, nodded politely, and went back to their food. Mara set a plate in front of Evelyn. Eggs, bacon, thick slices of bread with butter. More food than she'd eaten in a single sitting in weeks. Eat, Mara commanded. You're too thin. And don't give me that Eastern lady nonsense about watching your figure. Out here we work hard and we eat proper. Evelyn picked up her fork. The food was simple but good. The coffee was strong enough to make her eyes water, but it chased away the lingering fog of exhausted sleep. The men finished and headed out, calling their thanks to Mara. Evelyn helped clear the plates, despite Mara's protests. You're a guest, Mara said. I'm a woman who doesn't like being idle. Evelyn carried dishes to the wash basin. If I'm staying here, I should contribute. Mara smiled. You'll fit in fine, I think. They spent the morning in comfortable routine. Mara showed Evelyn around the boarding house, the parlor where guests could sit, the dining room used for larger meals, the back porch where laundry hung in the cold wind. 2 other boarders lived here, the men from breakfast, both railroad workers who kept regular hours and caused no trouble. Colt should be by this afternoon, Mara reminded her around midday. You'll want to freshen up before then. Evelyn returned to her room and changed into a slightly nicer dress, still practical but newer, with fewer wrinkles from travel. She redid her hair, touching up the powder on her bruise. The swelling had gone down considerably. In another week, it would be gone completely. If Victor didn't find her first, she pushed the thought away. Victor had no reason to think she'd come west, no reason to connect her disappearance with a railway correspondence listing. She'd been so careful. Left no notes, no hints, nothing that might point him toward Blackstone Station. A knock on the front door made her jump. That'll be Colt, Mara called up the stairs. Evelyn took a breath, checked her reflection one more time, and descended. Colt stood in the parlor, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable in the domestic space. He'd cleaned up since last night, fresh shirt, hair combed back, boots polished. He nodded when Evelyn appeared. Miss Mercer, if you're ready, I thought we could walk over to the freight office. I'm ready. Mara helped her with her coat. Don't let him work you too hard, dear. And Colt, make sure she eats supper before you send her back. She needs feeding up. A ghost of a smile crossed Colt's face. Yes, ma'am. They stepped out into the cold afternoon. The street was busier now, wagons rolling past, people hurrying between buildings, the ever-present sound of train whistles and steam engines. Evelyn stayed close to Colt, hyper-aware of every male face they passed. None of them were Victor. The freight office is just past the main station, Colt explained as they walked. We handle cargo transfer, goods coming off the trains, going onto wagons, heading out to ranches and settlements in the territory. It's steady work, growing too, as more people move west. How long have you owned it? 5 years this spring. Bought it from a man who wanted to retire. I'd been working freight since I was 16. Figured it was time to build something of my own. He guided her around a puddle of half-frozen mud. What did you do back east? Before... He caught himself, but Evelyn knew how the sentence would have ended. Before whatever happened that sent you running. I helped my father with his bank, she said. Kept his books, corresponded with clients, managed his schedule. After he died, my cousin took over. He didn't want my help. That was the polite version. The version that left out locked doors and bruises, and the day Victor had told her that her only value now was as a potential wife to one of his business associates. Men twice her age, men who looked at her the way hunters looked at trapped rabbits. Colt nodded slowly. Must have been hard, losing your father. Yes. They reached the freight office, a long, low building adjacent to the rail yard, with loading docks on one side and a small office entrance on the other. Colt opened the door, ushering her into a space that smelled like wood shavings and coal smoke. The office was chaos. Papers covered every surface. Ledgers lay open across a battered desk, their columns filled with cramped, barely legible handwriting. Receipts and bills of lading spilled from overstuffed boxes. A calendar on the wall was 3 months out of date. I warned you it was a mess, Colt said, looking embarrassed. Evelyn moved to the desk, studying the open ledger. The numbers were there, but the organization was non-existent. Incoming cargo mixed with outgoing shipments. Payments received jumbled with invoices pending. No clear system, no logical flow. This is... She trailed off, searching for diplomatic words. Bad? Fixable. She pulled off her gloves, setting them on a clear corner of the desk. But it will take time. I'll need to reorganize everything, create a proper system, cross-reference receipts with entries. How long? She surveyed the disaster. Weeks? Maybe a month? I can pay you for the time. Colt leaned against the doorframe, watching her. Standard bookkeeper wages. This isn't charity, Miss Mercer. It's work that needs doing, and you've got the skill to do it. Pride warred with practicality. Pride lost. She needed the work, needed the purpose, needed something to fill her days besides watching the street for Victor's face. I'll start tomorrow, she said. They spent the next hour going over his current system, such as it was. Colt explained how cargo moved through the yard, how payments were collected, how he tracked shipments. He was smart, Evelyn realized, just disorganized. The kind of man who could manage complex operations in his head, but struggled to translate them onto paper. I'll create a new system, she told him. Something simple. Something you can maintain after She caught herself. After we're married. The words felt strange in her mouth. That would be appreciated. Colt pulled a watch from his pocket, checking the time. It's getting late. Why don't I walk you back to Mrs. Quinn's? They retraced their steps through the darkening town. The temperature had dropped with the sun. Evelyn's breath plumed white in the air. I know this isn't what you're used to, Colt said as they walked. The town, I mean. It's rough out here. Hard winters, hard work, people who don't always mind their manners. I don't need refinement, Mr. Ryder. I need... She stopped, unsure how to finish. Safety? The word hung in the cold air between them. Evelyn's step faltered. What makes you say that? I'm not blind, Miss Mercer. His voice was gentle but firm, and I'm not a man who ignores signs when they're right in front of me. Someone hurt you. Back east. Hurt you bad enough that you ran 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. Her throat closed. I don't want to talk about it. You don't have to. Not now. Maybe not ever, if that's your choice. He paused at the corner, turning to face her in the lamplight. But I want you to know something. Whatever arrangement we make, marriage or just partnership, I won't ever raise my hand to you, won't control you or cage you or make you afraid in your own home. That's not how I was raised, and it's not the kind of man I am. Tears stung Evelyn's eyes. Why should I believe you? Because I'm telling you the truth. Something raw flickered in his expression. I had a sister, Emma. She married young, married a man who seemed decent enough at first. By the time we realized what he was really like, it was too late. She was trapped, and one night, when she tried to leave him, he stopped. Couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Evelyn understood anyway. I'm sorry, she whispered. I couldn't save her. The words came out rough. Couldn't protect her. I was 17 and stupid and too late. I've carried that for 15 years now. So when I put that listing in the railway correspondence, I wasn't looking for a decorative wife or a housekeeper I could boss around. I was looking for someone who wanted what I wanted, a partnership between equals. A life built on respect instead of, he gestured helplessly, instead of whatever you had back east. They stood there in the cold, two damaged people who'd found each other through a railway listing and desperation and a careful hope that maybe, somewhere west of the Mississippi, life could be different. I want to believe you, Evelyn said finally. I do. But I've been wrong before about men and their promises. Then don't believe my words. Colt's gray eyes met hers steadily. Watch my actions. Take all the time you need. And if you ever decide this isn't what you want, if you want to go somewhere else, start over again, I'll pay your passage. No questions asked. No obligations. It was the promise that broke through her defenses. Not the declarations of protection, not the assurances of safety, but the simple offer of freedom. The knowledge that she could leave if she chose to. Thank you, she managed. They walked the rest of the way in silence. At Mara's door, Colt tipped his hat. I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Mercer, at the freight office. Tomorrow, she agreed. She watched him walk away, broad shoulders disappearing into the darkness, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice when she'd answered that listing. Inside, Mara had supper waiting. They ate together, talking about small things, the weather, the boarding house, the rhythms of life in Blackstone Station, and later, alone in her room with the door locked from the inside, Evelyn pulled out the letters Colt had sent her over the past 6 weeks. She reread them by lamplight, looking for signs she might have missed. Red flags, warnings. But there was only straightforward honesty. Details about his business, about the town, about what he was looking for in a partner. No flowery promises, no attempts to sweep her off her feet, just a man offering what he had. A rough frontier life, hard work, and a chance to build something together. She folded the letters carefully and tucked them back into her suitcase. Tomorrow she'd start rebuilding his ledgers. And maybe, slowly, she'd start rebuilding herself too. The work became her salvation and her camouflage. Each morning, Evelyn walked from Mara's boarding house to the freight office, ledgers and receipts becoming familiar weights in her hands. The chaos Colt had created wasn't malicious, just the result of a man who could orchestrate complex cargo movements but couldn't translate them into neat columns. She established systems, created order from disorder, found a strange peace in the scratch of pen on paper and the satisfaction of balanced books. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Blackstone's rhythms seeped into her bones, train whistles marking time, the rumble of freight wagons, the particular quality of western light as it broke over distant mountains. She learned the names of regular customers, memorized shipping routes, became a fixture at the freight office, arriving before Colt most mornings, and staying late into the evenings when complex invoices needed reconciling. They fell into an easy partnership that surprised her. Colt would stop by her desk with questions about payments or contracts, leaning against the doorframe while she explained what the numbers actually meant. Sometimes he'd bring coffee from the station restaurant, setting it beside her elbow without comment. Other times they'd work in companionable silence, him handling the physical labor of the freight yard while she tamed the paperwork. He never touched her without permission, never crowded her space, never raised his voice, even when she discovered he'd been undercharging a customer for months, and the error had cost him significant money. "It's just money," he'd said, shrugging. "We'll make it back." She wasn't used to men who shrugged off mistakes. Victor would have exploded, would have found someone to blame, preferably her, would have made sure she understood exactly how worthless and incompetent she was. But Colt just thanked her for catching the error and asked her to draft a letter explaining the corrected rate to the customer. It was disarming, all of it. The quiet competence, the lack of drama, the way he treated her like an equal partner instead of property to be managed. Mara noticed. "You're smiling more," she said one evening as they prepared supper in the boarding house kitchen. Evelyn paused in the middle of peeling potatoes. "Am I?" "You are. It's good to see." Mara dumped chopped carrots into the pot. "Colt's good for you. We barely know each other." "You've been working side by side for a month. That's more than some couples learn about each other in years of marriage." Mara gave her a knowing look. "He cares for you. Anyone with eyes can see it." Evelyn's hand stilled on the potato. "It's an arrangement, a partnership." "Keep telling yourself that, dear." But the words lodged somewhere under her ribs, uncomfortable and oddly warm. She'd been so focused on survival, on staying hidden, on rebuilding the ledgers, on making herself useful enough that Colt wouldn't reconsider their agreement, that she hadn't stopped to think about what might be growing between them. Respect, certainly. She respected his work ethic, his fairness with customers, the way he treated his freight workers like people instead of tools. And he seemed to respect her mind, her organizational skills, the insight she offered about the business. But was it more than that? She didn't know. Wasn't sure she wanted to know. Wanting things, caring about people, made you vulnerable, made you hurt when they were taken away. Better to keep things simple, professional, safe. The potato slipped from her fingers and bounced across the floor. "Wool gathering?" Mara asked mildly. "Something like that." Evelyn retrieved the potato and returned to peeling, forcing her mind back to the immediate task. Supper. The evening ahead. Not the confusing tangle of feelings she didn't have time or energy to examine. That night she lay awake longer than usual, listening to the sounds of Blackstone settling into darkness. Somewhere down the street a piano played. Closer, one of the other boarders coughed. The wind rattled the shutters with the promise of more winter yet to come. She thought about Colt's sister, Emma. The woman who'd married wrong and paid for it with her life. Did Colt see Emma when he looked at Evelyn? Was that why he was so careful, so deliberate about giving her space and freedom? The thought should have bothered her, should have felt like pity or charity. Instead, it felt like understanding, like recognizing damage in someone else because you carried matching scars yourself. She pulled the quilt higher and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. It didn't. Not for a long time. The next morning brought unexpected trouble in the form of a telegram. Evelyn arrived at the freight office to find Colt standing at the desk, staring at a yellow paper with an expression she couldn't read. "What's wrong?" The words came out sharper than she intended. He looked up, and something in his face made her stomach drop. "Nothing that concerns the business, just family matters." Family. The word sent ice down her spine. What kind of family matters? Colt folded the telegram carefully, tucking it into his coat pocket. "My aunt back in Missouri, she's sick, asking if I can come help settle some affairs." He paused, studying Evelyn's face. "I'd need to leave for about 2 weeks, maybe 3. 2 weeks. 3 weeks. Alone in Blackstone without—" She caught herself. Without what? Without protection? She'd been taking care of herself for years, had survived Victor's worst and still found the strength to run. She didn't need Colt standing guard over her. "Of course you should go," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Family is important. The freight business, I can manage it." She moved to the desk, shuffling papers to give her hands something to do. "I know the system now. Know the customers. If anything complicated comes up, I'll hold it until you return. That's not what I'm worried about." Colt crossed to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell wood smoke and soap. "I'm worried about leaving you here alone. I'm staying with Mara. I'll be fine." Evelyn. He rarely used her first name. The sound of it made her look up. "I know you're running from something, someone, and I know you haven't told me the whole truth about what happened back east. That's your right, but if there's any chance that whoever hurt you might come looking, there isn't." The lie came automatically, smooth and practiced. "I was careful. No one knows where I went." His gray eyes searched her face. "You're sure?" "No." She wasn't sure of anything except that Victor was obsessive and cruel and entirely capable of spending months tracking her down. But admitting that would mean explaining everything: the inheritance, the locked doors, the beatings that had gotten worse after her father died and left her vulnerable. And she couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I'm sure," she said. Colt didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly. "All right, I'll arrange things. Make sure Mara knows I'll be gone. Leave you money for expenses and emergencies." He paused. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Take the time you need. Your aunt needs you." He left 3 days later on the eastbound morning train. Evelyn stood on the platform with Mara, watching the locomotive pull away in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. She told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was just nervousness about managing the freight business alone. Not loneliness, not the absence of someone she'd started to depend on without realizing it. "He'll be back before you know it," Mara said, linking her arm through Evelyn's. "Come on, we've got work to do." The first week passed smoothly enough. Evelyn managed shipments, processed payments, answered questions from customers who seemed mildly surprised that a woman could handle freight logistics. A few tested her, tried to dispute charges or claim shipments that hadn't arrived. She held firm, referencing the ledgers and contracts with a politeness that left no room for argument. Most backed down. Those who didn't found themselves dealing with Jake Morrison, the head freight handler who'd been working the yard since before Colt bought it and didn't take kindly to anyone disrespecting the boss's bookkeeper. "You tell them what's what, Miss Mercer," Jake said after running off a particularly aggressive customer. "Mr. Ryder left you in charge. That means you're in charge." It was empowering and terrifying in equal measure, making decisions, solving problems, being trusted with something that mattered. She threw herself into the work, staying late at the office and arriving early. Anything to avoid too much empty time where her mind might wander to Philadelphia and whether Victor had noticed yet that certain documents were missing from the safe. Whether he'd connected her disappearance with her father's hidden savings account that she'd emptied the day before she ran. Whether he was angry enough to come looking. The second week brought a cold snap that froze the water in the station horse troughs and turned the freight yard into a skating rink of icy mud. Business slowed. Fewer trains meant fewer shipments. Evelyn spent the quiet hours reorganizing the filing system and drafting a procedures manual so Colt would have something to reference when she wasn't around. When they were married, When she moved from Mara's boarding house to whatever home they'd established together, the thought felt strange, foreign, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit. She was sitting at the desk, struggling with a description of inventory procedures, when the office door opened and Mara entered, bundled against the cold. "There you are," Mara said. "I've been looking for you." Something in her tone made Evelyn set down her pen. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But we need to talk." Mara pulled off her gloves, studying Evelyn with that sharp gaze that missed nothing. "About you and what you're not saying." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Mara settled into the chair across from the desk. "I've been patient, giving you space. But that bruise you had when you arrived wasn't from a fall, and we both know it. And the way you watch the street, the way you tense up when strange men come to the office, that's fear, Evelyn. Deep fear. The kind that comes from experience. I don't want to talk about it. I think you need to." Mara's voice was gentle but firm. "Because whatever you're carrying, it's eating at you, and because Colt deserves to know what he might be facing when he comes back and marries you." The words hit like a slap. "You think I'm using him. I think you're protecting yourself the only way you know how. But protection built on secrets has a way of crumbling when the truth comes out." Mara leaned forward. "Talk to me, dear. Tell me what happened. Let someone help carry the weight." Evelyn's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against the desk, fighting for control. "If I tell you, you'll think less of me. You'll wonder why I didn't fight back sooner, why I let it go on so long." "I won't." Mara's voice was steady as stone. "I've known women who lived through what I suspect you did. There's no shame in survival." The dam broke. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the loneliness of Colt's absence. Maybe it was just the accumulated weight of 3 years of terror finally finding someone safe enough to set it down in front of. Evelyn told her everything. About her father's death and the will that left her inheritance in Victor's control until she married or turned 25. About Victor moving into the house 3 days after the funeral, all solicitous concern and family duty. About the first time he hit her, a backhanded slap when she questioned an expense on the estate accounts. About the locks that appeared on her bedroom door, the restrictions on where she could go and who she could see, the gradual isolation that turned her father's home into a prison. About the beatings that got worse when she tried to resist, when she refused to attend social functions on Victor's arm, when she wouldn't agree to marry the business associate he'd chosen, a man twice her age with dead eyes and wandering hands. About the night she finally broke, found her father's old pistol hidden in the library desk, stood outside Victor's study door with shaking hands and the gun raised, trying to find the courage to end it. But she couldn't pull the trigger, couldn't become a murderer, no matter how much he deserved it. So she ran instead. Took what money she could access, bought a ticket west, and answered the first railway correspondence listing that looked like it might lead somewhere Victor would never think to search. "I didn't choose Colt because I wanted to," she finished, the words barely a whisper. "I chose him because I was desperate and terrified and out of options. And now he's gone, and I keep waiting for Victor to walk through that door and drag me back to Philadelphia in chains." Silence filled the office. Outside, someone shouted orders to freight handlers. A train whistle cut through the cold air. Mara stood and moved around the desk. Without a word, she pulled Evelyn into a fierce embrace. "That man, Victor, he's evil," Mara said quietly. "What he did to you is evil, and you survived it. You found the strength to run when running was the only option left. That's not weakness, Evelyn. That's courage." "I don't feel courageous." "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." Mara pulled back, gripping Evelyn's shoulders. "And now you need to act again. You need to tell Colt the truth when he returns. All of it. Because if Victor does come looking, Colt needs to be prepared, needs to know what he's facing. He'll think I lied to him. He'll think you were protecting yourself. There's a difference." Mara's eyes were fierce. "And he'll stand with you. I know that man. Know what drives him. He won't let anyone hurt you, not while he's breathing." The certainty in her voice was almost convincing, almost enough to push back the fear that had lived in Evelyn's chest since the day she stepped off the train. Almost. "What if Victor's already looking?" Evelyn asked. "What if he's already on his way here? Then we deal with it. You, me, Colt, Jake, half the town if necessary." Mara's jaw set in a stubborn line. Blackstone might be rough around the edges, but we protect our own. And you're one of ours now, whether you believe it or not. Evelyn wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that a rough frontier town and a man she'd known for 6 weeks could stand against someone like Victor, with his money and his connections and his absolute certainty that she belonged to him. But wanting something didn't make it true. "I'll think about telling Colt," she said finally, "when he gets back." "Don't think too long." Mara released her shoulders and stepped back. Secrets have a way of coming out at the worst possible time. Better to control when and how than to let circumstance force your hand. They talked a while longer about practical things, about the freight business, and the upcoming week's shipments. Eventually, Mara headed back to the boarding house to prepare supper, leaving Evelyn alone with the ledgers and her churning thoughts. She tried to return to the procedures manual, but the words swam on the page. Her mind kept circling back to Philadelphia, to Victor discovering her gone, to the rage he must have felt finding her room empty, her clothes missing, her father's hidden account drained. He would have torn the house apart looking for clues, would have questioned the servants, checked her correspondence, examined every scrap of paper she might have touched. Would he have found the railway correspondence listing? She'd been so careful to burn it after memorizing Colt's address. But what if she'd missed something? What if some fragment had survived, just enough to point Victor west? The office door opened, startling her so badly she knocked over the inkwell. A stranger stood in the doorway, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of polished Eastern appearance that made her blood run cold. "I'm looking for Colt Ryder," the man said. Evelyn forced herself to breathe. Not Victor. This man was older, heavier, with a thick beard and friendly eyes. Just a customer, just someone with business to conduct. "Mr. Ryder is away on family matters," she managed. "I'm handling the freight business in his absence. How can I help you?" The man introduced himself as Thomas Brennan, a cattle buyer from Montana interested in establishing a regular shipping contract. They discussed rates and schedules and logistics, professional conversation, normal business, but Evelyn's hands shook the entire time. After Brennan left, she locked the office door and sat in the chair behind the desk, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't keep living like this, couldn't jump at every unexpected visitor, couldn't spend her life waiting for Victor to appear. Mara was right. She needed to tell Colt the truth, needed to stop pretending she was just a woman seeking a fresh start, and admit she was running from someone who wouldn't stop until he found her. The decision should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a different kind of fear. The fear of watching respect turn to pity in Colt's eyes, of seeing him realize he'd taken on more trouble than any woman was worth. But there was no other choice. Not if she wanted any chance at a real future. She cleaned up the spilled ink and closed the ledgers, preparing to head back to Mara's. Outside, the sun was setting in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible. Nothing like the gray Philadelphia winters she'd known. The beauty of it caught in her throat. This place, rough and cold and utterly foreign, had started to feel like something that might, eventually, become home. If Victor didn't destroy it first. Colt returned on a Thursday afternoon, stepping off the eastbound train looking tired and older than when he'd left. Evelyn saw him from the freight office window and felt something in her chest unclench. Relief, she told herself. Just relief that the business would return to normal. Not the bone-deep comfort of having him nearby again. Not the warmth that spread through her at the sight of his familiar figure moving through the crowd. She forced herself to stay at the desk, to finish the invoice she was writing. Professional, that's what this was. A business partnership. The door opened. Colt stood there with his travel bag, hat in hand, looking at her like she was water after a week in the desert. "You're back," she said stupidly. "I'm back." He set the bag down. "How did things go?" "Fine, no problems. The Morrison contract renewed. Had a new inquiry from a Montana cattle buyer." She gestured to the neat stacks of processed paperwork. "Everything's current." "I knew it would be." He moved closer, and she saw the exhaustion carved into his face. "My aunt, she passed. 2 days before I got there." "I'm so sorry." "She was ready. Been sick a long time." He pulled off his coat, hanging it on the rack by the door. "But the estate. There were complications. Legal matters. I had to stay longer than expected." "I'm glad you're back," Evelyn said, and meant it more than was probably wise. Something shifted in his expression. Are you? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning she wasn't ready to examine. The business runs better with you here. The business. He said it like he was testing the word. Right. Silence stretched. Evelyn became acutely aware of how alone they were, how close he stood, how her heart was beating too fast for a simple business conversation. I need to tell you something, she said before she could lose her nerve. About why I came here. About what I was running from. Colt's expression turned serious. All right. Not here. Not now, but soon. She gathered her courage. Maybe tomorrow evening, after work? Mara said we could use the boarding house parlor. Whatever you're comfortable with. His voice was gentle. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn. Take the time you need. But time was exactly what she didn't have. Because that night, as she was closing the freight office, she noticed a man watching from across the street. Well-dressed. Eastern style. Standing too still, staring too intently. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't Victor. This man was shorter, darker-haired. But the way he watched, calculating, assessing, set off every alarm she'd learned to recognize. She locked the office door with shaking hands and walked quickly toward Mara's, not quite running, but close. The man didn't follow, didn't move, just watched her disappear around the corner. When she reached the boarding house, she went straight to her room and pulled out the carpet bag she kept packed beneath her bed. The one with enough clothes and money to run if she needed to. The one she'd promised herself she wouldn't need in Blackstone. The one she now stared at with the sick certainty that she might have to use it after all. Because if Victor had sent someone to find her, it was only a matter of time before he came himself. And when he did, everyone she'd started to care about would be caught in the crossfire. The next morning, she arrived at the freight office early, before Colt. She needed to think, needed to plan, needed to figure out if running again was the only option, or if, you saw him too. She spun around. Colt stood in the doorway, still wearing his coat, expression grim. Saw who? Her voice came out too high, too defensive. The man watching the office last night. Eastern clothes, standing across the street like he had all the time in the world. Colt moved into the office, closing the door behind him. I was at the station restaurant, saw him watching you leave. Evelyn's knees went weak. She grabbed the edge of the desk for support. I don't know who he is, she said, which was technically true. But I think he might be connected to the person I ran from. Your cousin, Colt said it flatly, and Evelyn's head snapped up. How did you? Mara told me, this morning, before I came here. He held up a hand before Evelyn could protest. Don't be angry with her. She was worried, thought I should know what might be coming. Betrayal and relief warred in Evelyn's chest. She had no right. She had every right. You're staying in her house, and she cares about you. Colt crossed to stand in front of her. And I'm the man who asked you to marry me. I should have known before now. I was going to tell you, last night, today. I was trying to find the words. Evelyn. His voice was quiet but firm. I don't care that you didn't tell me sooner. I care that someone hurt you badly enough that you fled 2,000 miles, and you're still so scared you keep a packed bag under your bed. She stared at him. How did you know about the bag? Because I would have done the same thing. Pain flickered in his eyes. Emma kept one too. For months before she died, planning her escape, never quite finding the courage to run. The reminder of his sister, of the woman he'd lost to a violent man, made Evelyn's throat close. I should leave, she whispered, before Victor finds me here, before he hurts anyone else trying to get to me. No. The word was absolute. You're not running again. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then explain it to me. Colt moved closer, near enough that she could see the determination carved into his face. Tell me everything. Who he is, what he did, why he's looking for you. And then we'll figure out how to handle it. Together. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you stepped off that train. His jaw set in a stubborn line. I made you a promise, Evelyn. No one would hurt you while I was breathing. I meant it. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that a freight yard owner in a rough frontier town could protect her from Victor's money and rage and obsessive need to control what he considered his. But wanting didn't make it possible. He's not going to stop, she said. Not until he finds me. And if that man last night was sent by him, then Victor knows I'm here, knows about you, about Mara, about everything. Then we prepare. Colt's voice was steady, certain. We gather people we trust, make plans, make sure you're never alone. Make sure anyone who comes looking knows you're under protection. Protection won't be enough. Not against Victor. Maybe not. But it's a start. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. You survived 3 years of hell. You found the strength to run when running was your only option. That takes a kind of courage most people never have to find. Don't give up now. Not when you've come this far. His hand was warm, calloused, steady, an anchor in the storm of her panic. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, but you're not alone anymore. That makes a difference. Did it? Could Colt and Mara and Jake and a collection of freight workers really stand against someone like Victor? She didn't know. But looking into Colt's eyes, seeing the determination there, the echo of his own old failures, and the fierce need to make this time different, she understood that he would try, would stand between her and danger without hesitation, would probably get himself killed trying to protect her. The thought was unbearable. Promise me something, she said. Anything. If Victor comes, if he brings men, brings violence, promise me you won't throw your life away trying to save mine. Promise me you'll be smart about it. Colt's expression softened. I promise I won't be reckless, but I won't stand aside and let him take you either. That's not negotiable. It would have to be enough. Because the man watching last night had confirmed her worst fears. Victor was close. Closer than she'd hoped. Maybe close enough to arrive on the next train east. The endgame she'd been dreading was finally approaching. And this time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. They married on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday held any particular significance, but because waiting felt like giving Victor more time to arrive and destroy everything. The ceremony took place in Mara's parlor with Jake Morrison and 2 of the freight workers as witnesses. No flowers, no fancy dress, just Evelyn in her best wool skirt and Colt in a clean shirt, standing before the circuit minister who happened to be passing through Blackstone that week. The minister seemed uncertain about the rushed arrangement, about the bride who kept glancing toward the windows and the groom who stood close enough to her that their shoulders touched. But Mara had vouched for them both, and in the end he spoke the words that bound them together in law, if not yet in truth. Colt slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. His own hands were steady, while Evelyn shook so badly she could barely return the gesture with the ring she'd purchased from the general store the day before. You may kiss your bride, the minister said. Colt looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She managed a small nod. His kiss was brief, careful, nothing like the possessive claiming she'd feared, just a gentle press of lips that somehow felt more intimate than anything Victor's violence had ever forced on her. Congratulations, Mara said, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled them both into an embrace that smelled like bread and lavender. You're family now, both of you. Family. The word should have felt foreign. Instead, it settled over Evelyn like a blanket she hadn't known she needed. They had a small dinner afterward, roasted chicken and potatoes, nothing fancy but filling. Jake offered a toast that was more about Colt being a fair boss than about marriage. The other workers laughed and added their own rough congratulations. Normal people doing normal things, as if this was just an ordinary wedding and not a desperate attempt to create legal protection before disaster arrived. As twilight settled over Blackstone, Colt walked Evelyn back to the boarding house. They hadn't discussed where she would stay tonight. The freight office had that back room, but it was hardly suitable for a wedding night, and Mara's boarding house wasn't designed for married couples. I've been thinking, Colt said as they reached the porch. There's a house 2 streets over. Belongs to the Hendersons. They moved to California last month. I could rent it. Give us a proper place. Separate rooms if that's what you want. Just somewhere that's ours. Ours. Another word that felt strange and right all at once. I'd like that, Evelyn said. I'll make arrangements tomorrow. He hesitated, then took her hand. Evelyn, I know this isn't how either of us imagined getting married, and I know we're doing it for practical reasons as much as anything else. But I want you to know, I'm going to do right by you, however long it takes. She squeezed his hand, unable to find words adequate for what she was feeling. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, more complicated. something that felt dangerously close to hope. That night, she lay awake in her boarding house room, turning the gold ring on her finger. Mrs. Colt Ryder. The name felt like armor, like maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to keep Victor at bay. The illusion lasted exactly 4 days. On Saturday afternoon, while Evelyn was organizing shipment records and Colt was meeting with a supplier, the eastbound train pulled into Blackstone Station carrying Victor Hale himself. She didn't see him arrive, didn't know he was there until Jake burst into the freight office, his face flushed from running. "Miss Mercer, Mrs. Ryder, there's a man at the station asking for you. Eastern fellow, says he's your cousin, says he's come to bring you home." The paper slipped from Evelyn's hands, scattering across the floor. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. He'd found her. After 2,000 miles and 8 weeks of running, Victor had found her. "Where's Colt?" The words came out strangled. "Still at Brennan's warehouse. I can fetch him." "No." She forced herself to stand, to think. "Go get him. Tell him what's happened. But Jake, tell him not to do anything stupid. Tell him to wait until we have a plan." Jake hesitated. "That Eastern fellow, he's got men with him, 3 of them, looked like hired guns to me." Of course Victor had brought muscle. He never fought his own battles when he could pay someone else to do it. Evelyn's mind raced. She could run, grab her packed bag and disappear into the freight yard, catch a train heading west before Victor even knew she'd fled. But that would leave Colt and Mara and everyone else to deal with Victor's rage when he discovered she'd slipped away again. And she was tired of running, tired of letting fear make her decisions. "Go get Colt," she repeated. "I'll handle this." "Ma'am, I don't think—" "Jake, please." He went, though everything in his expression said he thought she was making a terrible mistake. Evelyn stood alone in the office, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear the station sounds through the walls, trains, voices, the everyday noise of Blackstone going about its business, all of it about to be shattered by Victor's arrival. She smoothed her skirt, touched the gold ring on her finger for courage, and walked out to face the man she'd spent 8 weeks trying to escape. The station hall was crowded with afternoon travelers. Victor stood near the ticket window, exactly as Jake had described, impeccably dressed in an Eastern suit that probably cost more than most Blackstone families earned in 6 months. His dark hair was slicked back, his expression one of practiced concern. The 3 men flanking him tried to look like simple employees, but their hard eyes and the way they wore their coats, loose to hide weapons, told a different story. Victor's gaze found her immediately. Something flickered in his face. Relief, anger, triumph, all mixed together into an expression that made her stomach turn. "Evelyn." He moved toward her, arms outstretched like he intended to embrace her. "Thank heavens. I've been so worried." She stepped back, maintaining distance. "How did you find me?" "Does it matter?" His smile was all wrong, too sharp at the edges. "I'm here now. We can settle this unfortunate misunderstanding and go home." People were watching. The ticket clerk, travelers waiting for their trains, a family with young children, all of them staring at the well-dressed Eastern gentleman and the woman who clearly didn't want his attention. "I am home," Evelyn said, loud enough for the watching crowd to hear. "I live here now. I'm married." Victor's expression hardened. "Married? To some frontier nobody you found through a railway listing." "Really, Evelyn, did you think that would make a difference?" "It makes all the difference. I'm not your ward anymore, Victor. You have no legal claim over me. I have a duty to your father's memory." He took another step forward, and this time she held her ground. "You're not thinking clearly. Haven't been since father died. That's why I've been so patient with you. But this has gone far enough. You're coming back to Philadelphia where you belong." "No." The word came out stronger than she felt. Victor's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't asking, cousin." His voice dropped, taking on the tone she remembered from locked rooms and threats delivered in whispers. "You've embarrassed me, cost me considerable time and money tracking you across the country. The least you can do is show some gratitude that I care enough to retrieve you." One of his hired men moved closer, positioning himself to block the exit. The crowd was growing, more people stopping to watch the confrontation, drawn by the tension crackling through the station air. Evelyn saw Mara near the telegraph office, her face pale but determined. Saw Jake pushing through the crowd with Colt behind him. Relief and terror warred in her chest. Colt was here, but that meant he was in danger too. There's nothing to retrieve, she said, keeping her attention on Victor. I made my choice. I'm staying in Blackstone. With some freight handler who probably married you for your inheritance? Victor's laugh was cruel. How much did you tell him, Evelyn, about your father's money? About the trust that comes due when you turn 25? I'm betting he knows exactly how much you're worth. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Not because it was true, she'd never mentioned the inheritance to Colt, but because it was exactly the kind of poison Victor excelled at spreading. My marriage is none of your concern. Everything about you is my concern. I'm your legal guardian until you reach majority age. He pulled papers from his coat pocket, waving them like proof. These documents give me authority over your person and property, including the right to determine where you live and who you associate with. Lies mixed with just enough truth to sound plausible. Yes, her father's will had placed her inheritance in Victor's control. But guardianship? She was 23 years old. There was no guardianship, unless Victor had somehow manufactured one, bribed a judge, forged documents, done whatever it took to maintain his control over her and her money. Those papers are false, Colt's voice cut through the station noise. He moved to stand beside Evelyn, close enough that their arms brushed. And even if they weren't, they're not valid in Wyoming territory. Victor's attention shifted to Colt, sizing him up with the kind of dismissive contempt he reserved for people he considered beneath him. You must be the opportunist who married my cousin. Victor's smile was all teeth. I suppose I should thank you for keeping her safe until I could arrive. How much do you want? To dissolve this sham marriage and return her to my care. She's not for sale. Colt's voice stayed level, but Evelyn could feel the anger radiating off him. And this marriage isn't going anywhere. Everything has a price, Mr. Ryder. Name yours. There isn't enough money in your Philadelphia bank account to make me hand over my wife to a man who beats women. The station went silent. Victor's face flushed dark red. How dare you? I've seen the bruises. Colt's words carried across the watching crowd. Seen how she flinches when men move too fast. Seen the fear in her eyes. You did that to her, and now you're trying to wrap it in legal language and family duty and concern. But we both know what it really is. Control, violence. The kind of thing cowards do when they can't maintain power any other way. Victor's hand moved toward his coat, toward where Evelyn knew he kept a derringer, the one he'd once pressed against her temple while explaining what happened to ungrateful relations who forgot their place. But Colt had already moved, putting himself between Evelyn and Victor, his own hand resting on the gun at his hip, not drawing it, just making it clear he could. You don't want to do that, Colt said quietly. Not here. Not with all these witnesses. The hired men had their hands on their own weapons now. The crowd pressed back, mothers pulling children close, men calculating whether to intervene or run. The station master appeared from his office, looking terrified. Gentlemen, please, there's no need for violence. Tell that to the man who spent 3 years terrorizing his cousin. Colt didn't take his eyes off Victor. The man who followed her 2,000 miles because he can't accept that she's free of him. Free? Victor's laugh was harsh. She's a foolish girl who ran away with fairy tales in her head, and you're a nobody who took advantage of her confusion. This marriage isn't legal. Those papers I showed you are worth exactly nothing. Mara's voice rang out as she pushed through the crowd. I was witness to their wedding, performed by Minister Crawford, duly registered with the territorial clerk. Evelyn Mercer became Evelyn Ryder in front of half a dozen witnesses. Your papers from Philadelphia don't change that. More people were nodding now. Jake and the freight workers had formed a loose semicircle behind Colt and Evelyn. Other townspeople, customers Evelyn had helped over the past weeks, women she'd greeted on the street, men who'd seen her working at the freight office, were gathering too. Victor seemed to realize he was losing ground. His expression shifted, became calculating. Very well. If my cousin believes herself married, I won't contest it, but the inheritance remains in trust. And I'm entitled to regular accounting of how it's being managed. I'll need to speak with Evelyn privately. Go over the financial arrangements, make sure this husband of hers understands the terms. No private conversations. Evelyn found her voice again, stronger now with Colt beside her and the town at her back. Anything you have to say, you can say here, in front of witnesses. Victor's mask slipped for just a second. She saw the rage underneath, the absolute fury that she was defying him publicly, humiliating him in front of strangers. You're going to regret this, he said softly. Both of you. The only thing I regret is not leaving sooner. Evelyn stepped forward, moving slightly ahead of Colt. This was her fight. Her past. Time to face it, instead of hiding behind someone else's protection. You don't control me anymore, Victor. You don't control my money, my choices, or my future. Go back to Philadelphia. Find some other way to fund your gambling debts and mistresses. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with bruising force. You ungrateful! Colt moved like lightning. One moment Victor had her wrist. The next he was stumbling backward, Colt's forearm across his throat, pressed against the ticket window. Touch her again, Colt said, his voice deadly quiet. And witnesses won't matter. Legal consequences won't matter. The only thing that will matter is how fast I can put you on the ground. The hired men drew their guns. Jake and several other townsmen pulled their own weapons. The station erupted into chaos, women screaming, people diving for cover, the station master shouting for everyone to calm down. Evelyn's ears rang. This was it. The moment everything fell apart. Someone was going to die in this station, probably Colt, because of her. Because she'd been stupid enough to think she could escape Victor's reach. Stop! The voice came from an unexpected source. One of Victor's hired men, the oldest of the three. He'd holstered his gun and was staring at Victor with disgust. I signed on to help a man find his missing cousin, the man said. Nobody mentioned it was about dragging a woman back to a man who beats her. I don't work that kind of job. The other two hired men exchanged glances. Slowly, carefully, they lowered their weapons. Victor's face had gone purple. I'm paying you. Not enough for this. The older man gestured to his companions. We're done here. You can find your own way back to Philadelphia. They walked out, leaving Victor alone with nothing but his rage and his expensive suit and a station full of people who just watched his veneer of respectability crack wide open. Colt released him, stepping back to stand beside Evelyn again. Victor straightened his coat, trying to salvage some dignity. This isn't over, he'd said. I'll contest the marriage. Bring legal action. You'll be hearing from my attorneys. Looking forward to it, Colt's voice was steady. Wyoming Territory courts don't take kindly to men who abuse women. Bring your lawyers. Bring your forged documents. Bring whatever you want. We'll be ready. Victor's eyes found Evelyn one last time. The look in them was pure hatred. You were always worthless, he said. Your father knew it. That's why he left everything in my control. Because he knew you'd squander it the first chance you got. The words were designed to wound, to plant doubt and shame and all the poison he'd been feeding her for 3 years. But standing there in Blackstone Station, with Colt's solid presence beside her and half the town at her back, Evelyn found that the words had lost their power. My father loved me, she said quietly, and he'd be ashamed of what you became. Get out, Victor. Get out of this station, out of this town, and out of my life. For a moment she thought he might refuse, might stand there arguing until someone fetched the territorial marshal or the situation exploded into actual violence. Then he turned on his heel and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing on the station floor. The crowd parted to let him through, their faces showing everything from sympathy to outright hostility. Evelyn watched him go, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and shock and the disbelief that she'd actually done it, had actually stood up to him, had sent him away. The station door slammed. Through the windows, she could see Victor climbing into a hired carriage, already shouting orders to the driver. A few minutes later, the carriage pulled away, heading back toward the depot where the next eastbound train would depart. Silence settled over the station. Then Mara was there, pulling Evelyn into a fierce embrace. You did it, Mara whispered. You stood up to him. We did it. Evelyn pulled back to look at Colt, at Jake, at the townspeople who'd gathered to support a woman most of them barely knew. All of us. Colt's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Are you all right? Was she? Her wrist throbbed where Victor had grabbed it. Her heart was still racing. Her mind kept replaying the moment when guns had been drawn and she'd been certain someone was going to die. But Victor was gone. Leaving. Defeated, at least for now. I'm all right, she said, and meant it. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their business with the particular energy that came after witnessing something dramatic. The station master approached hesitantly. Mrs. Ryder, if you need to file a complaint with the territorial authorities, I'll think about it, Evelyn said. Thank you. He nodded and retreated to his office, clearly relieved the situation hadn't ended in bloodshed on his platform. Jake cleared his throat. I should get back to the freight yard, make sure nothing went sideways while we were all here. Thank you, Jake. Colt clasped his shoulder. For everything. Just doing what's right. Jake tipped his hat to Evelyn. Ma'am, you ever need anything, you just say the word. He left with the other freight workers, their voices carrying back through the station as they discussed what had just happened. Evelyn could imagine the story spreading through Blackstone by nightfall, growing with each retelling. Come on, Mara said. Both of you. Let's go home. You need tea and food and time to settle your nerves. They walked back through Blackstone together, Mara chattering to fill the silence, Colt quiet and watchful beside Evelyn. Her wrist was already darkening where Victor had grabbed it, another bruise to add to the collection, though this one felt different. This one marked the moment she'd finally fought back. At the boarding house, Mara made good on her promise of tea and food. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup she couldn't quite bring herself to drink from. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind exhaustion and the shaky aftermath of confrontation. He'll try again, she said quietly. You know he will. He won't just give up and go home. Maybe. Colt sat across from her, his own tea untouched. But he knows now that you're not alone, that you've got people who will stand with you. That changes things. Does it? He's got money, connections, lawyers who'll say whatever he pays them to say. We've got, what? A freight business and a collection of railroad workers? We've got the truth. Mara set a plate of bread and cheese on the table. And witnesses who saw him grab you, heard him make threats. That matters, Evelyn. Especially out here where judges tend to take a dim view of Eastern gentlemen who think their money gives them the right to terrorize women. Evelyn wanted to believe her. Wanted to trust that standing up to Victor once would be enough to make him leave her alone. But she knew him too well. Knew his pride, his obsessive need for control, his absolute certainty that she belonged to him. One public defeat wouldn't change that. If anything, it would make him more determined. We should prepare for him to come back, she said, maybe with a marshal or with legal documents that look more official, or with... She couldn't finish the thought. Couldn't voice the fear that Victor might simply stop pretending to be civilized and resort to violence. Then we prepare. Colt reached across the table, taking her hand carefully, mindful of the bruising wrist. We talk to the territorial authorities, get our marriage registered with every office that matters, make sure there's no legal loophole Victor can exploit, and we stay alert. I'm sorry, the words burst out before Evelyn could stop them. I'm sorry I brought this into your life, into all your lives. You didn't ask for this. Stop! Mara's voice was sharp. You didn't bring anything. Victor brought this, his violence, his obsession, his refusal to let you go. None of that is your fault. But no buts. You survived 3 years of abuse, found the courage to run, built a new life here. The only person who should be apologizing is Victor, and we both know that's never going to happen. Mara's eyes were fierce. So stop taking responsibility for his choices. Stop carrying his shame. It doesn't belong to you. The words hit something deep inside Evelyn's chest, some knot she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Tears spilled over before she could stop them. Colt stood, moving around the table to pull her into his arms. Not demanding, not possessive, just steady and warm and present. She buried her face against his shoulder and cried. For the girl she'd been before Victor destroyed her father's house. For the 3 years she'd lost to fear. For the uncertain future that still stretched ahead. And when the tears finally stopped, she pulled back to find both Colt and Mara watching her with expressions that held no pity. Just understanding and determination, and something that looked almost like pride. Better? Mara asked gently. Evelyn nodded, wiping her eyes. Better. Good. Because we've got plans to make. Mara pulled a chair up to the table, her expression turning businesslike. First thing tomorrow, we go to the territorial clerk and make sure your marriage is registered everywhere it needs to be. Then we talk to the town marshal about what happened today. Get it on record. Then we live our lives. Colt's voice was quiet but firm. We don't let Victor's threats turn us into prisoners. We go about our business. We build our home. We do exactly what we planned before he showed up. But if he comes back, we handle it, together. Colt's gray eyes met hers steadily. You stood up to him today, Evelyn. faced him down in front of half the town. That took more courage than most people find in a lifetime. Don't let the fear of what might happen take that away from you. He was right. She knew he was right. Spending the rest of her life waiting for Victor's next move was just another kind of cage. "All right," she said. "We live our lives." They talked for another hour, making practical plans and trying to predict Victor's next move. Eventually, Mara shooed them both out, insisting she needed to prepare supper and they needed rest. Colt walked Evelyn upstairs to her room, the one she'd been staying in since arriving in Blackstone, though that would change soon when they moved into the Henderson house. At the door, he hesitated. "Are you sure you're all right? Today was—" "I know." She touched his arm, feeling the solid strength of him. "Thank you for standing with me, for not letting him take me. I meant what I said before. I won't ever let anyone hurt you, not while I'm breathing." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized was still there. "You're not alone anymore, Evelyn. You need to start believing that." She turned her face into his palm, letting herself lean into the comfort he offered. "I'm trying. That's all I ask." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle, careful, nothing like the violence Victor had represented. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." She watched him descend the stairs, heard the front door close as he headed back to the freight office. Then she entered her room and locked the door, a habit she couldn't seem to break even though the lock was meant to keep danger out, not keep her in. The pack bag still sat under her bed. She pulled it out, staring at it for a long moment. This bag had represented escape, safety, the ability to run if running became necessary. But maybe it was time to stop running. She unpacked it slowly, hanging the dresses in the wardrobe, putting the money back in her suitcase, setting aside the travel items she'd kept ready for weeks. By the time she finished, the bag was empty. Just canvas and leather, no longer a lifeline. She shoved it to the back of the closet and climbed into bed, her body exhausted but her mind still racing. Victor was gone. For now. But she knew him well enough to know this wasn't over. He'd be planning his next move, finding new ways to get to her, refusing to accept defeat. The difference was that this time she'd be ready. This time she wouldn't be alone. She touched the gold ring on her finger, feeling its weight. Mrs. Colt Ryder. The name that had started as protection had become something more. Something real. And tomorrow, they'd start building whatever came next. Victor didn't leave Blackstone. Not right away. Evelyn discovered this 2 days later when she spotted him through the freight office window, standing across the street in conversation with a man she didn't recognize. They stood just far enough away that she couldn't hear their words, but close enough that Victor's message was clear. He was watching, waiting, planning whatever came next. Colt noticed her staring and moved to the window. His jaw tightened when he saw Victor. "He's staying at the hotel," Colt said quietly. "Checked in the night of the confrontation. Been making inquiries around town, asking questions about our marriage, about the freight business, about you." "What kind of questions?" "The kind designed to find weaknesses, people he can bribe or intimidate, legal angles he can exploit." Colt's hand found the small of her back, a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. "The town marshal knows he's here. Been keeping an eye on him." Evelyn watched Victor gesture emphatically to his companion. Even from this distance, she could read his body language, the anger in his movements, the rigid set of his shoulders. He was planning something. She just didn't know what yet. "We should be doing more than watching," she said. "Should be figuring out how to make him leave permanently. I'm open to suggestions that don't involve me ending up in a territorial prison." The dark humor in his voice surprised a laugh out of her. It felt wrong to laugh with Victor standing right there, but also strangely freeing, as if refusing to let his presence steal every moment of lightness was its own form of resistance. "We could always bore him to death with freight manifests," she offered. "Now there's a thought." Colt's hand pressed gently against her back. "Come on, let's get back to work. Best thing we can do is exactly what I said before. Live our lives. Show him he doesn't have the power to stop us." She let him guide her back to the desk, but her attention kept drifting to the window, to Victor and his schemes and the inevitable confrontation that was building like a storm on the horizon. The next morning brought that storm crashing down. Evelyn was at Mara's, helping prepare breakfast for the boarders, when someone pounded on the front door. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. Evelyn heard male voices, urgent and overlapping, then Mara calling her name. She found 3 men in the parlor, the town marshal and 2 strangers in suits that screamed Eastern lawyers. Her stomach dropped. "Mrs. Ryder," the marshal said, his expression apologetic, "these gentlemen have papers, court documents from Philadelphia. They're claiming—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "They're claiming your marriage to Colt Ryder isn't legal, that you're still under guardianship and the marriage was conducted without proper consent." One of the lawyers stepped forward, producing a sheaf of papers with official-looking seals. "Mrs. Mercer, as you are still legally known, we represent your cousin Victor Hale in matters concerning your welfare and estate. These documents establish Mr. Hale's guardianship over your person until you reach the age of 25 or enter into a marriage approved by him as your legal guardian." "That's a lie." Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm 23 years old. There is no guardianship. These court records from Philadelphia say otherwise." The lawyer's smile was professional and empty. "Signed by Judge Morrison 3 months after your father's death. Mr. Hale petitioned for guardianship on the grounds that you were emotionally unstable following your bereavement and unable to manage your own affairs." Emotionally unstable. The words were carefully chosen. Clinical. Designed to paint her as someone incompetent to make her own decisions. "Where's Colt?" she asked the marshal. "At the freight office. Should I send for him?" "Please." The marshal dispatched a deputy while Evelyn stood in Mara's parlor, trying to process what was happening. Victor hadn't given up and gone home. He'd been in Blackstone gathering ammunition, preparing this legal assault. Mara appeared at her elbow. "Don't say anything else to these men, not until Colt gets here." "Mrs. Quinn, we're simply here to serve legal documents," the lawyer said. "Mrs. Mercer is entitled to review them and respond through proper legal channels." "Mrs. Ryder," Mara corrected sharply. "And she's not saying another word until her husband arrives." They waited in tense silence. The lawyers stood with their papers, the marshal looked increasingly uncomfortable, and Mara stationed herself next to Evelyn like a guard dog. Minutes crawled past. Finally, the door burst open and Colt strode in, his expression thunderous. He took in the scene, the lawyers, the papers, Evelyn's pale face, and moved directly to her side. "What's this about?" The lawyer repeated his explanation, handing over the documents. Colt read them, his jaw getting tighter with each page. "These are fraudulent," he said finally. "No judge would grant guardianship over a grown woman without serious cause, and even if they did, Pennsylvania law doesn't apply in Wyoming territory. The documents are entirely legitimate, Mr. Ryder, and questions of their validity will be addressed by the territorial court, not by you." The lawyer's tone was condescending. "In the meantime, we're here to inform Mrs. Mercer that her current living arrangement is under legal review. Until the matter is settled, she should refrain from making any major financial or personal decisions." "She's already made her decision. She married me. That's not under review by anyone except us." "A marriage conducted without proper guardian consent is voidable under the law." The lawyer produced another document. "We're prepared to file a petition with the territorial court requesting annulment on those grounds." The room tilted. Annulment. Voiding the marriage. Taking away the one legal protection she had against Victor dragging her back to Philadelphia. "You can file whatever you want," Colt said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Doesn't mean any judge will grant it. Evelyn is an adult. She has the right to marry who she chooses, and your client's so-called guardianship is worth exactly nothing out here. We'll see what the court says." The lawyer tucked his papers back into his case. "Mrs. Mercer, you should be aware that Mr. Hale is prepared to offer a very generous settlement. Return to Philadelphia, agree to proper oversight of your affairs, and he'll ensure your inheritance is managed responsibly. Continue with this current course, and he'll be forced to take more aggressive legal action." "Get out!" Evelyn found her voice again, and it came out cold. "Get out of this house. If you want to file your petitions and fight your legal battles, do it through proper channels. But don't come here with threats disguised as concern." The lawyer's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Mercer. Mr. Hale has resources you can't possibly match. He will win this fight." "Then let him try." Colt stepped forward, putting himself between Evelyn and the lawyers. "But he'll do it in court, with proper legal proceedings, not through intimidation in a boarding house parlor. Now leave, before I help you out." The threat was clear enough. The lawyers exchanged glances, then gathered their materials and headed for the door. The marshal followed them out, throwing an apologetic look back at Evelyn. The moment the door closed, Evelyn's legs gave out. She sank into the nearest chair, her hands shaking. "He forged those papers," she said. "He must have. No judge would grant guardianship without evidence of incompetence, and I was managing my father's bank accounts right up until Victor took over." Forged or obtained through bribery. Colt knelt beside her chair. "Either way, they're not legitimate. But we need to prove it, and that means lawyers of our own. I don't have money for lawyers, not the kind who could fight Victor's resources." "I do." Mara stood with her arms crossed, her expression fierce. "Enough to hire someone competent. And before you argue, this isn't charity. It's investment. Victor Hale doesn't get to come into my town and terrorize women under some fake legal authority." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to insist she couldn't accept more help, couldn't keep pulling other people into her mess. But the truth was, she needed help. Needed it desperately. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we've sent that bastard packing for good." Mara moved toward the kitchen. "I'm making coffee. Strong coffee. Then we're going to sit down and figure out exactly how to fight this." They spent the rest of the morning strategizing. Mara knew a lawyer in Cheyenne who handled territorial cases. Colt suggested gathering witness statements from everyone who'd seen the confrontation at the station. Evelyn tried to remember details from her father's will, from the estate documents, from anything that might prove Victor's guardianship claim was false. By afternoon, a plan had emerged. Colt would travel to Cheyenne, meet with the lawyer Mara recommended, and bring back someone who could file the proper countermotions. Mara would gather testimonies from townspeople. Evelyn would go through every paper she'd brought from Philadelphia, looking for evidence. It wasn't much, but it was something. 3 days later, Victor made his next move. Evelyn was closing the freight office for the evening when she heard the commotion outside. Shouting voices, the sound of breaking glass. She rushed to the window and saw a crowd gathering near the station. Fire. Something was on fire. She ran outside, her heart hammering. The flames were coming from one of the freight warehouses, the one where they stored dry goods and paper products. Already the blaze was spreading, orange light reflecting off the horrified faces of people racing with buckets from the station water tower. Colt was there, organizing the firefighting effort, shouting orders to get the livestock moved away from the adjacent pens. Jake and the freight workers formed a bucket brigade. Evelyn grabbed a bucket and joined the line, passing water hand to hand in a desperate attempt to contain the flames. It took 2 hours to get the fire under control. By then the warehouse was a blackened shell, most of its contents destroyed. Exhausted and soot-covered, the firefighters collapsed on the ground, coughing and catching their breath. Colt found Evelyn in the crowd. His face was streaked with ash, his hands blistered from hot metal. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No? You?" "I'll live." He looked at the ruined warehouse, his expression grim. This wasn't an accident. The marshal arrived as the last embers were being doused. He walked the perimeter of the burned building, examining the remains. "Someone set this," he announced. "Can smell the kerosene. This was arson." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Arson meant someone had deliberately tried to destroy Colt's business, and everyone had a pretty good idea who. "I want to talk to Victor Hale," the marshal said. "Anyone know where he is?" "Probably at the hotel," Jake offered. "Saw him there earlier today." The marshal headed off with 2 deputies. Colt sank down on a shipping crate, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Evelyn sat beside him. "This is my fault." "Don't." His voice was rough from smoke. "Don't take responsibility for what Victor does. This is on him." "But he's doing it because of me, trying to hurt you to get to me." "Then he's miscalculated." Colt looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting firelight. "All he's done is make this personal, give the town another reason to stand against him. Arson's a serious crime out here. He just handed us leverage." The marshal returned an hour later with disappointing news. Victor had an alibi. He'd been at the hotel restaurant all evening, in full view of multiple witnesses. The hotel owner confirmed it. "Could have hired someone to set the fire," the marshal admitted, "but proving that's going to be difficult without evidence." Colt nodded wearily. "We'll figure it out. Thanks for trying, Marshal." After the crowd dispersed, Evelyn and Colt stood looking at the destroyed warehouse. Months of inventory gone. significant financial loss that the freight business could ill afford. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said again. "Stop apologizing." Colt took her hand, his grip gentle despite his blistered palms. "We'll rebuild. Order new inventory. The business will survive. What matters is that no one got hurt. What if next time someone does? What if Victor escalates, goes after you directly instead of just property? Then I'll deal with it." His voice was steady, certain. "But I won't let fear of what might happen dictate how we live. That's exactly what Victor wants, to scare us into submission. I won't give him that satisfaction." She wanted his certainty, wanted to believe they could weather whatever Victor threw at them. But the smoking ruins of the warehouse were a stark reminder of how far her cousin was willing to go. That night, Colt insisted on walking her back to Mara's. The streets were dark, lit only by scattered lamps and the distant glow from the station. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every sound made Evelyn jump. At the boarding house door, Colt paused. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her stomach clench. "What?" "The lawyer from Cheyenne. He looked into Victor's guardianship claim, into the Philadelphia court records." Colt's expression was troubled. "The documents are real, Evelyn, not forged. Judge Morrison actually did grant Victor guardianship." The ground seemed to drop away beneath her feet. "But that's impossible. I was never declared incompetent, never had any hearing, or it was done in absentia. 3 months after your father died, Victor petitioned the court claiming you'd suffered a mental collapse and were a danger to yourself. He provided testimony from a doctor who'd supposedly examined you. The judge granted temporary guardianship pending a full evaluation. I never saw any doctor, never had any mental collapse. Victor made it all up." "I know, but proving it means going back to Philadelphia, facing Victor's lawyers and bought judges in his territory." Colt's hands settled on her shoulders. "The lawyer thinks we can fight it here, argue that Wyoming territory courts aren't bound by Pennsylvania's decisions, especially when the guardianship was obtained fraudulently. But it's going to be a battle, an expensive, drawn-out legal battle." Evelyn's mind raced. Victor had been planning this for months, setting up legal traps, manufacturing evidence, making sure he had the documentation to justify dragging her back if she ever escaped. She'd underestimated him, badly. "Maybe I should just go back," she said quietly. "Face him in Philadelphia. Fight it there, where the guardianship was granted." "No." Colt's grip tightened. "That's exactly what he wants. To get you back on his territory, where he controls everything. Here, we have a chance. Here, you have people who know the truth and will testify to it." But the fire was Victor showing his hand, proving he's willing to break the law to get what he wants. That helps our case, Evelyn. Shows he's not a concerned guardian. He's a violent man who'll do anything to maintain control. She wanted to believe him, but exhaustion and fear were dragging her down, making it hard to think clearly. "I'm tired," she admitted. "I'm so tired of fighting him, of looking over my shoulder, of watching good people get hurt because of me." "Then lean on us." Colt pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. "Let us carry some of the weight. That's what family does." Family. There was that word again. The one that had become real somewhere between the freight office ledgers and Mara's kitchen and this moment standing on a dark porch with her husband's arms around her. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered against his chest. "Don't know how to let people help." "You're doing it right now." His voice rumbled through his chest. "Just like this, one moment at a time." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other while the night settled around them. Evelyn let herself absorb his strength, his certainty, the steady beat of his heart against her ear. Tomorrow the legal fight would continue. Tomorrow they'd start rebuilding the warehouse and gathering evidence and preparing for whatever Victor threw at them next. But tonight, she was just a woman being held by a man who'd somehow become more than a convenient arrangement. Who'd become a partner, a protector, maybe even... She didn't let herself finish the thought. It was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous to start caring that deeply when everything could still fall apart. The following week brought a development nobody expected. The territorial court agreed to hear arguments regarding the guardianship. Both sides would present their case, and a judge would rule on whether Pennsylvania's decision was enforceable in Wyoming. The lawyer from Cheyenne, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Morrison, arrived in Blackstone to prepare their defense. She spent hours interviewing Evelyn, documenting Victor's abuse, gathering witness statements from everyone who'd seen the station confrontation. Your case is stronger than you think, Catherine told them. Victor's guardianship was granted on medical grounds that were never properly substantiated. No independent evaluation, no testimony from you, just one doctor's statement. That's highly irregular. Can we prove the doctor lied? Evelyn asked. Better than that. I did some digging. The doctor who signed the evaluation? He's been investigated twice for providing false medical testimony in inheritance cases. Never charged, but the pattern is clear. He sells his medical opinion to the highest bidder. Hope flickered in Evelyn's chest. So we can discredit him. We can try, but Victor's lawyers will argue that doesn't invalidate the guardianship itself. Just means it should be reviewed. Catherine's expression turned serious. There's another angle we need to consider. The inheritance. How much are we talking about? Evelyn named the figure, her father's life savings, the proceeds from selling his share of the bank, investments that had grown over the years. It was substantial, enough to live comfortably for decades if managed properly. Catherine's eyebrows rose. That's significant, and Victor's been controlling it for 3 years? Yes, I don't even know how much is left. He could have spent it all for all I know. We need to request a full accounting. Force Victor to produce records of every penny he spent from the estate. If there's been mismanagement or theft, that undermines his claim to be a responsible guardian. They spent the next days preparing. Catherine filed motions requesting financial records. Victor's lawyers objected, claiming the Wyoming court had no jurisdiction over Pennsylvania estate matters. The judge ordered the records produced anyway. When they arrived, the news was worse than Evelyn had feared. Nearly a third of her inheritance was gone. Victor had spent lavishly on himself, expensive clothes, gambling debts, a new carriage, renovations to the Philadelphia house, all documented in careful ledgers as estate management expenses. He's been stealing from you, Catherine said flatly, using your money to fund his lifestyle while keeping you locked up and dependent. The anger that rose in Evelyn was different from the fear she'd been carrying. This was clean, hot fury. Victor hadn't just beaten her and terrorized her. He'd been robbing her blind while claiming it was for her own good. Can we use this? Colt asked. Absolutely. It proves Victor's interest in maintaining guardianship isn't about Evelyn's welfare. It's about maintaining access to her money. Catherine smiled grimly. This is exactly the ammunition we need. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Blackstone rallied. Townspeople who barely knew Evelyn offered to testify about Victor's behavior at the station. The freight workers documented the warehouse fire and their suspicions about Victor's involvement. Even the hotel owner, who'd provided Victor's alibi, quietly mentioned to the marshal that he'd seen Victor talking with some rough-looking characters the day before the fire. It wasn't proof, but it was a pattern, a picture of a man who used money and intimidation to get what he wanted, regardless of who got hurt. 2 weeks before the hearing, Evelyn made a decision. She asked Colt to teach her to shoot. They went to a clearing outside town, away from buildings and people. Colt brought his rifle and a collection of tin cans for targets. You sure about this? He asked, loading the rifle. I'm sure. Evelyn's hands were steady as she took the weapon. Victor's escalating. The fire proved that. Next time he might not target property. I need to be able to protect myself. Colt showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. The first shot went wide, the recoil surprising her. The second came closer. By the 10th shot, she was hitting the cans more often than not. You're a natural, Colt said, sounding impressed. My father taught me the basics when I was young, before he got sick and Victor moved in. She reloaded, her movements growing more confident. I'd forgotten how it felt. Having this kind of power. It's not about power, it's about safety. Maybe they're the same thing. She lined up another shot, squeezed the trigger, watched the can spin away. Victor's used violence to control me for 3 years. Maybe it's time I showed him I can fight back. Colt was quiet for a moment. Violence isn't the answer, Evelyn. That's what the law is for. The law didn't stop him from beating me in Philadelphia. Didn't stop him from forging guardianship papers. Didn't stop him from burning down your warehouse. She lowered the rifle, looking at him directly. I'm not saying I want to shoot him. I'm saying I want him to know I could. Want him to understand that I'm not helpless anymore. Understanding dawned in Colt's eyes. This is about more than protection. This is about taking back everything he stole. My autonomy, my courage, my ability to stand my ground. She raised the rifle again, sighting down at a distant can. I ran from him once. I'm not running again. The shot rang out across the clearing. The can jumped and fell. They practiced until the sun started setting, until Evelyn's shoulder ached from recoil and her ears rang from the gunfire. By the time they packed up to head back to town, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Dangerous. The hearing arrived on a cold Thursday morning. The territorial courthouse was packed. Townspeople who'd come to support Evelyn, curious onlookers drawn by the scandal, reporters from Cheyenne who'd gotten wind of the story. Victor sat on one side with his lawyers, looking confident and controlled in an expensive suit. Evelyn sat on the other with Colt and Catherine, her heart hammering but her spine straight. Judge Harrison was a weathered man in his 60s who'd been appointed to the territorial bench after years as a circuit judge. He reviewed the papers before him with no visible emotion. This court will hear arguments regarding the enforceability of a Pennsylvania guardianship order in Wyoming territory, he announced. Counselor Morrison, you may begin. Catherine stood and Evelyn watched as she systematically dismantled Victor's case. She presented evidence of the fraudulent medical testimony, documented Victor's financial mismanagement of the estate, called witnesses who testified to seeing Victor grab Evelyn at the station, who'd heard him make threats, who could attest to her competence in managing the freight business. Victor's lawyers fought back, arguing that Pennsylvania law was clear and binding, that Evelyn's marriage was invalid without guardian consent, that Victor had acted in good faith based on medical advice. But when Victor himself took the stand, Catherine tore him apart. Mr. Hale, you testified that you sought guardianship out of concern for your cousin's welfare. Is that correct? Yes. Evelyn was distraught after her father's death. I feared for her safety. Yet you never sought medical treatment for her, never had her evaluated by multiple doctors, never attempted any therapeutic intervention. I provided a safe home environment. You locked her in her bedroom. Witnesses have testified to this. Did you consider that therapeutic? Victor's composure cracked slightly. She was a danger to herself. Was she? Or was she simply resistant to your control? Catherine produced the financial records. These documents show you spent over $40,000 of her inheritance on personal expenses, gambling debts, luxury purchases, even a new carriage. How does that expenditure relate to your cousin's welfare? Estate management requires certain expenditures. $40,000? In 3 years? While keeping your cousin isolated and dependent? Catherine's voice was sharp as a blade. This court has seen your medical testimony, seen your financial records, heard witnesses describe your violent behavior. You're not a concerned guardian, Mr. Hale. You're a thief who used fraudulent guardianship to steal from your cousin while keeping her imprisoned. Objection. Victor's lawyer was on his feet. Counselor is making accusations not in evidence. The records speak for themselves, Catherine said calmly. The question before this court is simple. Should Wyoming Territory enforce a guardianship obtained through fraudulent means by a man who has demonstrably misused his authority for personal gain? The arguments went on for hours. Evelyn testified about the abuse, about Victor's control, about her reasons for fleeing. Colt testified about finding her with bruises, about the confrontation at the station, about Victor's continued harassment. By late afternoon, both sides had rested their cases. Judge Harrison reviewed his notes, his expression unreadable. This court will take the matter under advisement, he announced. Decision will be rendered within 1 week. 1 week. 7 more days of waiting, of not knowing whether she'd finally be free of Victor's legal control or whether the judge would uphold the guardianship and give Victor exactly what he wanted. They filed out of the courthouse into cold afternoon air. Victor and his lawyers headed one direction. Evelyn and her supporters headed another. You did well, Catherine told her. Your testimony was clear and credible. The judge could see you're not mentally incompetent. But will he rule in our favor? I think so, but I've been wrong before. Catherine's honesty was bracing. We'll know soon enough. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed at Mara's boarding house, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the hearing. Had she said enough? Had she been convincing? Or had Victor's lawyers planted enough doubt that the judge would err on the side of caution and uphold the Pennsylvania order? A soft knock on her door made her sit up. Yes? It's me, Colt's voice came through the wood. Can I come in? She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. Kept thinking about the hearing, about Victor. He ran a hand through his hair. Can we talk? She let him in, leaving the door cracked open for propriety. They sat on the edge of her bed, the only furniture in the small room besides the wardrobe. Whatever the judge decides, Colt said quietly, I want you to know something. This marriage, it started as a practical arrangement, protection in exchange for partnership. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real for me. Evelyn's breath caught. Colt, Ubo? I'm not asking you to feel the same. I know we haven't known each other long. Know you've got a lot of healing to do, but I needed to say it. Needed you to understand that I'm not standing with you out of obligation anymore. I'm standing with you because I want to, because I... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I care about you, more than I probably should given the circumstances. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Evelyn looked at this man who'd become so much more than she'd ever expected, who'd protected her without smothering her, who'd given her space to heal while still being present, who'd risked his business and his safety to stand against Victor. I care about you too, she admitted. It scares me. After everything with Victor, the idea of caring about someone, of being vulnerable again. I know, and I'm not asking you to be vulnerable. Not until you're ready. His hand found hers in the darkness. I just wanted you to know that when this is over, when Victor's finally gone and the legal mess is settled, I'd like the chance to court you properly, to build something real together, if that's what you want. What did she want? Safety, certainly. Freedom from Victor's shadow, a life that was truly her own. But beyond that, she wanted this. Wanted the quiet partnership she and Colt had built. Wanted more mornings at the freight office and evenings planning their future. Wanted to see where this careful, growing affection might lead. I'd like that, she said softly. When this is over. When I'm finally free. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. Then we'll make sure you get free. Whatever it takes. They sat together in the darkness, holding hands and not speaking, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Eventually Colt stood to leave, but at the door he paused. Evelyn, whatever happens with the judge's decision, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this. I know. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The week crawled past with agonizing slowness. Evelyn threw herself into work at the freight office, processing invoices and updating ledgers, and trying not to watch the calendar. Colt coordinated rebuilding the burned warehouse. Mara gathered the boarding house residents for a prayer circle, though Evelyn politely excused herself from that particular comfort. On the 7th day, word came that Judge Harrison had reached his decision. The hearing would reconvene at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Evelyn dressed carefully, choosing her best dress and pinning her hair up with steady hands. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a different woman than the one who'd stepped off the train 3 months ago. That woman had been broken, terrified, hiding bruises and trauma beneath layers of careful composure. This woman was still scarred, still healing. But she'd found her spine again, found people worth fighting for and a future worth claiming. Whatever the judge decided, she'd face it standing upright. The courthouse was packed again. Evelyn took her seat beside Colt and Catherine, her hands folded in her lap. Victor sat across the aisle, his expression confident, too confident. Judge Harrison entered. Everyone stood. He settled behind his bench and picked up his written decision. The court has carefully reviewed all testimony and evidence presented, he began. The question before us is whether this court will enforce a guardianship order obtained in Pennsylvania based on questionable medical testimony and implemented without proper due process for the alleged incompetent. Evelyn's heart hammered. She felt Colt's hand find hers under the table, squeezing tight. After thorough consideration, the judge continued, this court finds that the Pennsylvania guardianship order was obtained through fraudulent means. The medical testimony provided was not credible. The petitioner, Victor Hale, has demonstrably mismanaged the estate he was appointed to protect, and the alleged incompetent, Evelyn Ryder, has proven through her testimony and conduct that she is fully capable of managing her own affairs. Relief crashed over Evelyn like a wave. Beside her, Catherine was smiling. Therefore, Judge Harrison said, this court declines to enforce the Pennsylvania guardianship in Wyoming territory. Mrs. Evelyn Ryder is declared legally competent and free from any guardianship restrictions. Furthermore, this court recommends that the Pennsylvania authorities review the original guardianship grant for evidence of fraud and perjury. The gavel came down. Final. Binding. She was free. The courtroom erupted in applause. Evelyn sat frozen, unable to quite process what had just happened. 3 years of Victor's control wiped away with the judge's ruling. We won, Catherine said, gripping her shoulder. You're free, Evelyn. Legally free. Across the aisle, Victor was on his feet, his face purple with rage. He said something to his lawyers, gesturing angrily. They tried to calm him, but he shook them off and stormed toward the exit. As he passed Evelyn's table, he stopped, leaned down close enough that only she could hear. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll destroy you for this. You and everyone you care about. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing through the courthouse as he disappeared into the afternoon. Evelyn should have felt afraid, should have worried about what Victor would do next, how he'd retaliate. Instead, she felt nothing but fierce, burning certainty. Let him try. Let him bring his worst. Because this time she wouldn't run. This time she'd fight. Victor's threat echoed in Evelyn's mind as she left the courthouse, but she refused to let it dim the victory. The judge's ruling had stripped away the legal weapon Victor had wielded for 3 years. Now whatever he tried would be naked aggression, no longer cloaked in the respectable guise of guardianship. That night, Blackstone celebrated. Mara organized a dinner at the boarding house with half the town invited. Jake and the freight workers brought whiskey. The station master's wife baked 3 pies. People Evelyn barely knew stopped by to offer congratulations and support. To Mrs. Ryder, Jake declared, raising his glass. The toughest bookkeeper this side of the Mississippi. Laughter and cheers filled the parlor. Evelyn felt Colt's hand at the small of her back, steady and warm. She looked around at these people who'd become family without her quite realizing when it happened. Mara with her fierce protective instincts, Jake with his rough loyalty, Catherine Morrison, who'd fought for her in court. Even the boarding house residents who barely knew her but had shown up anyway because that's what people did in places like Blackstone. Victor had been wrong about so many things, but he'd been most wrong about this, thinking she was alone, thinking he could isolate her here the way he had in Philadelphia. Speech, someone called out. Evelyn shook her head, but Mara pushed her forward gently. Say something, dear. They all want to hear from you. She stood awkwardly, unused to being the center of attention for anything good. The room quieted, faces turning toward her expectantly. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice unsteady. 3 months ago, I stepped off a train carrying nothing but fear and a suitcase. I thought I was running to the end of the world, thought I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But you all taught me something. Taught me that running doesn't have to mean hiding, that starting over doesn't mean being alone, that sometimes the end of the world is actually the beginning of home. Her voice caught. Colt's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Thank you, she finished simply, for standing with me, for being the family I didn't know I needed. The applause was deafening. Mara pulled her into a crushing embrace. Jake clapped Colt on the shoulder. Catherine raised her glass with a knowing smile. But even in the middle of celebration, Evelyn's mind kept circling back to Victor's parting words. This isn't over. She knew him too well to dismiss the threat as empty bluster. Victor didn't make idle promises. When he said he'd destroy her, he meant it. The question was how and when. She got her answer 2 days later. Evelyn was at the freight office, reconciling accounts, when the door burst open and a young boy rushed in, out of breath. Mrs. Ryder, Mrs. Quinn sent me, says you need to come quick. There's trouble at the boarding house. Her blood turned to ice. What kind of trouble? Men came, Eastern men. They're saying Mrs. Quinn owes money, lots of money. They got papers and everything. Evelyn was already moving, grabbing her coat. Where's Colt? At the new warehouse. I can fetch him. Do it. Tell him to meet me at Mara's. She ran through the streets, her heart hammering. This was Victor's doing. Had to be. He'd found a new angle, a new way to strike at the people she cared about. The boarding house looked normal from the outside, but inside she found Mara standing in the parlor facing two men in suits. Legal documents were spread across the table. "What's happening?" Evelyn demanded. One of the men turned. "Are you Mrs. Ryder?" "I am. Who are you?" "Representatives of the First Bank of Philadelphia. We're here regarding outstanding debts owed by Mrs. Mara Quinn." He gestured to the papers. "A loan of $5,000, 3 years overdue. We're authorized to seize property in lieu of payment." "That's a lie." Mara's voice shook with anger. "I never borrowed money from any Philadelphia bank. These documents say otherwise." The man produced a promissory note with Mara's signature at the bottom. "Signed and witnessed 3 years ago." Evelyn grabbed the paper, studying it. The signature looked like Mara's, but something was off about it. The handwriting was too careful, too practiced. "This is forged," Evelyn said flatly. "Victor Hale forged this." "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Ryder. Are you suggesting we're party to fraud?" "I'm suggesting you're being used. Victor Hale is my cousin. He's been trying to force me back to Philadelphia for months. Now that the courts have ruled against him, he's attacking my friends instead." The men exchanged glances. "We're simply executing a legitimate debt collection." "There is no legitimate debt." Evelyn's voice was steel. "That signature is forged, and I can prove it." She turned to Mara. "Do you have any papers with your real signature? Old letters, legal documents, anything dated before 3 years ago?" Mara hurried upstairs and returned with a box of papers. Correspondence, her late husband's will, property deeds. Evelyn spread them on the table beside the promissory note. "Look," she said, pointing. "Mara's real signature has a distinctive loop on the Q in Quinn. This forged one doesn't, and the pressure is different. Mara presses harder on downstrokes. This is someone copying her signature, not her actual hand." The debt collectors leaned in, studying the differences. Their certainty seemed to waver. "Even if this is forged," one said slowly, "we were hired in good faith. We have no way of knowing." "You know now." Colt's voice came from the doorway. He stood there with Jake and 2 of the freight workers, all of them looking ready for trouble. "So you can take your forged papers and get out, before this becomes a problem." The collectors looked at the men blocking the exit, then back at their documents. "We'll need to consult with our employer, Betier. You do that. Tell Victor Hale that forgery and fraud carry serious penalties in Wyoming territory. Tell him we're filing charges with the territorial marshal." Colt moved aside just enough to let them pass. "And tell him if he comes after anyone else in this town, he won't be dealing with lawyers next time." The men gathered their papers and left quickly, nearly tripping over each other in their haste. The moment the door closed behind them, Mara sank into a chair. "How did he get my signature?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I've never had any business with Philadelphia banks." "Doesn't matter," Evelyn said grimly. "Victor's desperate. The court ruling humiliated him, cost him control over my inheritance. Now he's lashing out at anyone connected to me. We need to stop him." Colt's expression was dark. "Before he hurts someone else." "How? He's in Philadelphia by now, far beyond the marshal's reach." "Maybe not." Catherine and Morrison appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "I heard what happened. Came as soon as I could." She set her legal case on the table. "I've been doing some research since the hearing, looking into Victor's background, his finances, his business dealings." She pulled out a folder thick with papers. "Victor Hale is broke. More than broke. He's drowning in debt. Gambling losses, bad investments, expensive habits. The only thing keeping his creditors at bay was access to your inheritance, Evelyn. Now that the courts cut him off, his financial house of cards is collapsing." "So he's desperate," Evelyn said. "Beyond desperate. I found evidence he's been forging documents for months. Not just your guardianship papers. He's been creating false promissory notes, fraudulent contracts, anything to generate cash or delay creditors." Catherine tapped the folder. "This is enough to bring criminal charges. Real charges, not just civil disputes." Hope flickered in Evelyn's chest. "Can we use this?" "We can, but we need to move fast. Victor knows his situation is deteriorating. That makes him unpredictable, dangerous." As if summoning him by speaking his name, the telegram arrived an hour later. The station master himself delivered it, his expression worried. The message was brief and chilling, returning to Blackstone. "Stop, we'll settle this personally. Stop arriving Friday. Stop VH 2 days. Victor would be back in 2 days. He's coming to finish this, Evelyn said, staring at the telegram. One way or another. Let him come. Colt's voice was hard. We'll be ready. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Catherine filed criminal complaints with the territorial authorities, documenting Victor's forgeries and frauds. The marshal agreed to be present when Victor arrived. Colt organized the freight workers, making sure someone was always watching the station, the boarding house, the freight office. Evelyn moved through the preparations with a strange calm. This was it, the final confrontation. After this, one way or another, it would be over. On Thursday night, unable to sleep, she found herself at the freight office long after dark. The ledgers sat before her, neat columns of numbers that represented months of work, building something, creating order from chaos. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Colt in the doorway. Figured I'd find you here, he said, moving into the office. Can't sleep either? Keep thinking about tomorrow, about what Victor might do. Colt pulled up a chair, sitting beside her at the desk. We've done everything we can. The marshal will be there. Catherine has the evidence ready. Half the town knows to be watching. I know, but Victor's cornered now, desperate. That makes him more dangerous, not less. Then we stay alert, stay together. His hand covered hers on the desk. I won't let him hurt you, Evelyn. I promised you that the night you arrived, and I meant it. She looked at their joined hands, his work-roughened fingers gentle against her smaller ones. Somewhere in the past 3 months, this man had become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. I used to think safety meant being invisible, she said quietly. Meant making myself small and quiet so I wouldn't provoke violence. But that's not safety. That's just slower dying. What changed your mind? You. Mara. This whole town. She met his eyes. Real safety isn't about hiding. It's about being strong enough to stand your ground. Being surrounded by people who'll stand with you. Colt smiled. Something warm and genuine that transformed his usually serious face. You've changed too, you know. The woman who stepped off that train 3 months ago wouldn't have faced down Victor in the courthouse, wouldn't have caught that forgery, wouldn't be sitting here calm and ready for whatever comes next. I'm not calm. I'm terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He squeezed her hand. You're the bravest person I know, Evelyn Ryder. The use of her married name sent warmth through her chest. Not Mercer. Not the broken girl from Philadelphia. Ryder. A woman who'd claimed a new name and a new life and refused to let anyone take it from her. When this is over, she said, when Victor's finally dealt with and gone, I'd like to really be married to you. Not just legally, but truly. Build a life together. Build a home. Colt's expression softened. I'd like that too. They sat together in the quiet office, holding hands and gathering strength from each other. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, they had this. Each other. The life they were building together. That would have to be enough. Friday dawned cold and clear. The eastbound train was due at 2 in the afternoon. By noon, half of Blackstone had gathered near the station, word having spread that something significant was about to happen. The marshal positioned himself on the platform with 2 deputies. Catherine stood ready with her evidence folders. Colt stayed close to Evelyn, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. When the train pulled in, Victor was the first passenger off. He looked terrible. Rumpled suit, dark circles under his eyes. The veneer of respectability stripped away to reveal something desperate and mean underneath. He saw the gathered crowd and his expression twisted with rage. Evelyn! He strode toward her, ignoring everyone else. We're settling this. Now. Once and for all. The marshal stepped forward. Mr. Hale, you need to calm down. Stay out of this. Victor's attention never left Evelyn. You've cost me everything. My reputation, my finances, my standing, all because you're too stupid to understand that I was protecting you. You were stealing from me, Evelyn said, her voice carrying across the platform. Forging documents, beating me, keeping me prisoner. That's not protection, Victor. That's abuse. I gave you everything. A home, security, management of your father's estate. You gave me bruises and terror, and 3 years of my life I'll never get back. Evelyn moved forward, Colt matching her step for step. But that's over now. The court ruled. You have no power over me anymore. The court was wrong. You're incompetent, emotional. You need guidance. The only thing I need is for you to leave. Get on the next train east and never come back." Victor's face went purple. "You ungrateful—" His hand went to his coat pocket. Time seemed to slow. Evelyn saw the movement, saw the flash of metal as Victor pulled the derringer she'd known he carried, saw Colt starting to move, reaching for his own weapon. But she was faster. The rifle she'd been carrying, the one Colt had taught her to shoot in that clearing outside town, came up smooth and steady. She sighted down the barrel exactly as he'd shown her, breathing out slowly, finger finding the trigger. "Drop it, Victor." Her voice was calm, steady. Nothing like the terrified girl who'd cowered from his fists for 3 years. Victor froze, the derringer halfway raised. "You won't shoot me. You don't have the courage." "Try me." The rifle didn't waver. "You spent 3 years teaching me what happens when someone has power over you, when they can hurt you, and you can't fight back. You taught me that lesson real well, Victor, so drop the gun, or find out if I learned it." The crowd had gone silent. The marshal and his deputies had their own weapons drawn now, but nobody moved. This moment belonged to Evelyn and Victor, to the girl he'd broken and the woman she'd become. Victor's hand shook. Rage and disbelief warred in his expression. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Evelyn's finger tightened on the trigger just enough for him to see. "Last chance. Drop it." For a long moment she thought he'd refuse. Thought his pride and rage would drive him to pull that trigger, forcing her to shoot him in front of half of Blackstone. Then the derringer clattered to the platform. Smart choice. Evelyn lowered the rifle slightly, but kept it ready. "Marshal, he's all yours." The deputies moved in, securing Victor's hands behind his back. The marshal retrieved the derringer, checking it with professional efficiency. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest for attempted assault, forgery, fraud, and about 6 other charges Miss Morrison here has documented." He gestured to Catherine, who stepped forward with her evidence folders. "You'll be held in territorial custody pending trial." "This is ridiculous." Victor struggled against the deputy's grip. "I came here to retrieve my cousin." "You came here to threaten her with a weapon," the marshal corrected, "in front of multiple witnesses. That's not guardianship, Mr. Hale. That's assault with intent to harm." They dragged Victor away, his protests echoing across the platform. Evelyn watched him go, the rifle heavy in her hands, her heart hammering with adrenaline and the dizzy realization of what she'd just done. Colt's hand settled on her shoulder. "You all right?" "I didn't shoot him." "No, you didn't." "I thought about it. For just a second, I really thought about it." "But you didn't." Colt gently took the rifle from her shaking hands. "You gave him the chance to surrender. That's the difference between you and him, Evelyn. You had the power and you chose mercy." She turned to face him, and the tears finally came. Not from fear or sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being free. Colt pulled her into his arms, holding her while she shook with the aftermath. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "He can't hurt you anymore." The crowd began to disperse, people talking in low voices about what they'd witnessed. Mara appeared, wrapping both of them in a fierce embrace. Catherine was already organizing her legal case, preparing to make sure Victor faced every possible charge. "You were magnificent," Mara said, pulling back to look at Evelyn. "Absolutely magnificent." "I was terrified. That's what made it magnificent." Mara's eyes were bright with tears. "You stood your ground despite the fear. That's real courage, dear." They walked back through Blackstone together, a small group of people who'd become family. The town looked the same as always, rough wooden buildings, muddy streets, the constant sound of trains and commerce. But it felt different now. Felt like home. At the boarding house, they found the other residents had prepared a meal. Simple food, nothing fancy, but offered with warmth and celebration. Evelyn ate without tasting, her mind still processing what had happened. Victor was in custody, facing real criminal charges with evidence to support them. Even his money and connections couldn't erase what he'd done in front of witnesses. Catherine estimated he'd spend at least 5 years in territorial prison, possibly more. 5 years. Maybe more. Long enough for Evelyn to build a real life. Long enough for the fear to finally fade. That evening, Colt walked her to the Henderson house. The one he'd rented for them weeks ago, but they'd never moved into. Too caught up in fighting Victor's attacks. It was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and windows that looked out on the mountains. "We could move in tomorrow," Colt said, standing in the empty parlor. "If you're ready, make it a real home." Evelyn looked around at the space that would be theirs. No locked doors, no bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, no waiting for violence to find her in the dark. "I'm ready," she said. "But Colt, I need you to understand something. I'm not the woman I was before Victor. I'm not sure I'll ever be that person again. The damage he did, some of it's permanent. I still flinch at loud noises, still check door locks 3 times, still have nights where I can't sleep because I'm sure he's somehow found a way to come back. I know." Colt's voice was gentle. "I'm not expecting you to be perfect or healed or anything other than who you are right now. We'll take it one day at a time, build our life together at whatever pace feels right." "What if I can't be a proper wife? What if the thought of—" She couldn't finish, but he understood. "Then we'll figure it out together. There's no timeline, Evelyn. No expectations except honesty and partnership." He took her hands carefully. "I told you from the beginning, I'm not looking for someone to own. I'm looking for an equal, someone to build a life with. That's still all I want." The tears came again, but this time they were cleansing, washing away the last remnants of fear and shame and the belief that she was too damaged for anything good. "I love you," she whispered. The first time she'd said it. The first time she'd let herself feel it. Colt's expression softened into something beautiful. "I love you too. Have for weeks now, if I'm being honest." He kissed her then, gentle and careful and full of promise. Not demanding anything she wasn't ready to give, just affirming what they'd both finally admitted. They stood together in their future home, holding each other as twilight deepened outside. Tomorrow they'd move in, would start the real work of building a marriage, would face whatever challenges came with patience and partnership. But tonight, they had this moment, this victory, this hard-won freedom. The months that followed brought changes Evelyn couldn't have imagined. Victor was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 7 years in territorial prison. His Philadelphia creditors seized what remained of his assets. The inheritance he'd stolen from Evelyn was partially recovered, enough to rebuild what he'd taken. She used some of that money to expand the freight business, hiring more workers and building additional warehouses. Used more to help Mara renovate the boarding house. Gave some to the women's shelter that opened in Blackstone that spring, a place for women fleeing situations like the one she'd escaped. The freight office flourished under her management. Turns out Eastern banking education translated well to frontier business. She implemented systems that streamlined operations, negotiated better rates with the railway, built relationships with customers across the territory. Colt remained the face of the operation, but Evelyn was its brain. And everyone in Blackstone knew it. Their marriage grew slowly, carefully, with the patience of 2 people who understood that healing couldn't be rushed. Some nights Evelyn still woke from nightmares and found Colt beside her, solid and present. Some days the fear returned and she had to talk herself through it, remembering she was safe now. But gradually, the good days outnumbered the bad. The moments of peace outnumbered the moments of panic. She learned to trust again, learned that love didn't have to mean control, learned that strength came in many forms, and vulnerability could be its own kind of courage. 2 years after stepping off that midnight train, Evelyn stood on the freight office porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Her hand rested on her growing belly, a child coming in the spring, wanted and planned for and already loved. Colt emerged from the warehouse, covered in dust but smiling. "Inventory's done. Numbers should be ready for you tomorrow." "Good. The quarterly reports are due next week." He climbed the porch steps and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands settling over hers on her belly. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, happy, still a little scared sometimes." "About the baby?" "About everything." She leaned back against his chest. "About being a mother. About whether I'll be any good at it given what I came from." "You'll be wonderful." His voice was certain. "You're already fierce and protective and brave. That's most of what children need." She turned in his arms to face him. "And the rest?" "Love, which you've got in abundance." He kissed her forehead. "We'll figure it out together, same as we've figured out everything else." Together. That word had become their foundation. Not him protecting her or her depending on him, but both of them standing side by side, facing whatever came. "I never thanked you properly," she said, "for answering my letter, for giving me a chance when you had no reason to trust me. You don't need to thank me. You gave me something too." His gray eyes met hers steadily. "Gave me a second chance at the family I lost. A chance to do it right this time. To protect without smothering, to love without controlling." They stood together as the sun set over Blackstone, two damaged people who'd found each other through desperation and a railway listing, and the kind of courage it takes to start over. The train whistle echoed across the valley, carrying other travelers to other destinations. But Evelyn's traveling was done. She'd found what she'd been searching for, though it looked nothing like what she'd imagined. Not safety in isolation, but safety in community. Not freedom from fear, but the strength to face it. Not a perfect life, but a real one, built on honesty and hard work and the kind of love that grew slowly in difficult soil. She'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living, that running from danger was sometimes necessary, but running towards something better was the real victory. That the woman she'd become, scarred and imperfect and still healing, was stronger than the girl she'd been before Victor broke her. And most importantly, she'd learned that home wasn't a place. It was people. It was Colt's steady presence and Mara's fierce protection and the Blackstone community that had claimed her as one of their own. It was the freight office where she'd rebuilt both ledgers and herself. It was the life she was creating, one day at a time, with patience and courage, and the bone-deep certainty that she'd finally found where she belonged. The mountains turned purple in the fading light. Somewhere a child laughed. The freight yard settled into evening quiet, and Evelyn Ryder, no longer Mercer, no longer running, no longer afraid, stood on her porch with her husband's arms around her and their child growing beneath her heart, and knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home.